Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. Before we begin our slow journey into the past, take a moment to get comfortable. Pull up your softest blanket. Let it wrap around your shoulders like an old story. Settle into a cozy spot, and allow the day to fall away, bit by bit. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep making these long, sleepy dives into forgotten corners of history. And if you're still awake for a little while, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Whether you're drifting off in Tokyo, stretching out in California, or watching the sunrise in Ghana, you're welcome here. You're about to hear a gentle, detailed look into a world both distant and strangely familiar. The life of a child growing up in a samurai family, and all the quiet rhythms, burdens, rituals, and questions that came with it. Now, close your eyes if you like. Let your breath slow, and come with me to another time. Imagine waking up on a straw mat, long before the sun rises. The air is cool, and the walls around you are made of thin paper stretched across wooden frames. There is no pillow, only a small neck rest made of lacquered wood. You are a child, but already, you are expected to behave like a warrior. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not complain. You do not play loudly. There are no toys scattered on the floor, no laughter echoing through the halls. This is a samurai household, and childhood here is not about freedom. It is about preparation. You bow to your parents each morning. If you are a boy, your father rarely smiles. He teaches by example, not by words. If you are a girl, your lessons are just as strict, though different. You must learn to pour tea without a sound, to walk without creaking the floor, to carry yourself with quiet pride, even when you are exhausted. Breakfast is plain, maybe a bowl of rice, a bit of pickled vegetable. You eat in silence. Your posture is straight. No slouching, no reaching across. Every gesture matters. Every movement is watched. After breakfast, the training begins. If you are a boy, you might be given a wooden sword. It is heavier than you expected. Your hands ache from gripping it. You are taught how to kneel properly, how to bow with just the right angle, how to swing, not with strength, but with control. Discipline is everything. Pain is ignored. Tears are shameful. If you are a girl, you study calligraphy. You dip the brush in black ink and trace characters over and over again until your wrist aches. The brush must move like wind, not like a whip. Each stroke must show your inner calm. Your letters must look like they were written by someone twice your age. There is no school in the way we think of school today. But you learn. You learn to read Chinese poetry, even if you do not fully understand it yet. You learn to recite the sayings of Confucius, who speaks of duty and respect and knowing your place. Even games, when allowed, have purpose. Boys might practice wrestling to build strength. Girls might fold paper into cranes to train their fingers and focus their minds. Every part of your day shapes you into what you are expected to become. You do not run wild in the fields. You do not talk back. Even laughter is quiet. Too much noise is seen as weakness. The house is large, but most rooms are empty. Tatami mats cover the floors, soft but firm. The air smells faintly of rice glue and old wood. There are scrolls hanging in the alcove. Maybe a painting of a mountain. Maybe a poem written in ink. Everything has meaning. Everything is placed carefully. You do not touch anything without permission. Servants move through the house quietly. They do not look you in the eye unless addressed. Their silence teaches you how to be invisible when needed. They rise before dawn. They know the rhythms of the house better than you do. They have lived here longer than you have been alive. But still, you must learn to command them with respect when your turn comes. Sometimes, older boys go away to train with another samurai family. This is called becoming a page. You serve in another house to learn obedience. You clean. You watch. You fetch items without question. You memorize the way your superiors speak and move. Your emotions are kept hidden behind a calm face. One day, someone might insult you in front of others. You must bow. You must endure. There are lessons in death too. You hear stories of warriors who chose to die rather than lose honor. You learn that your life is not truly your own. It belongs to your family, to your lord, to the name you carry. If ordered, you are expected to die with grace. Not in battle, but by your own hand. This lesson is whispered early, even if it is not explained fully. Your parents speak of honor as if it is a living thing. It follows you like a shadow. One wrong step, and it shatters. And shame does not fade. It is remembered for generations. And yet there is beauty. Sometimes your mother places a branch of plum blossoms in the alcove. Sometimes, your father pauses at sunset to admire the light on the garden stones. In these small moments, you are allowed to feel something like peace. But even that peace is quiet, controlled, careful. There are festivals too. Days when you wear special robes and walk through the streets in procession. But even on those days, your face must remain calm. Your posture must be perfect. You represent more than yourself. In the samurai world, nothing is casual. Even childhood is shaped by expectation, duty, and restraint. You are not raised to dream, but to serve. Not to explore who you are, but to become who they expect. And so the days pass. Quietly, strictly. You grow not in freedom, but in form. Like a tree tied to grow in a certain shape. Beautiful, perhaps, but never wild. Let this image stay with you now. The quiet house. The smell of tatame. The steady rhythm of footsteps in the hall. A child kneeling before a low table, brush in hand, face calm, heart steady. And now, we leave this part of the story behind and move gently into the next. From the silent halls of childhood, we drift forward to a famous tale, one that speaks of loyalty, loss, and honor beyond the grave. Let us stay in this quiet world a little longer. Imagine yourself just a little older now. You have grown into the rules. You know how to bow without thinking, how to sit without moving, how to keep your face still even when your thoughts race. You understand that a samurai's life is not truly their own. It belongs to duty and to those above you. To understand how deep that duty runs, let us drift now into a famous story. A story that is both tragic and calm, quiet and powerful. A story told over and over again in Japan, painted on folding screens, whispered in plays and remembered in temples. It is the story of the 47 Ronin. The word Ronin means a samurai with no master. A wave man. Someone who drifts without a lord to follow. For a true samurai, this was a shameful state. To lose one's master was to lose one's purpose. But these 47 men chose a different path. They became Ronin not by accident, but by duty. A final, painful duty that changed the course of their lives. It began with a man named Lord Asano. He was the daimyo or lord of a domain called Akeo. Asano was a proud man, but not always calm. He served at the court of the shogun in Edo, which is now Tokyo. While there, he had to work with a powerful official named Kira. Kira was said to be arrogant, used to bribes, and unkind to those who would not flatter him. Asano did not flatter, and Kira mocked him, insulted him in front of others. Over time, the tension built up, until one day Asano snapped. He drew his sword inside Edo Castle and struck Kira, though he did not kill him. This was a terrible crime. To draw a weapon inside the shogun's palace was unforgivable. For this, Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide. He obeyed without resistance, with calm, with honor. But his men, the samurai of Akeo, were left behind. Suddenly they were Ronin, without a master, without purpose. According to the rules, they should have scattered, taken other jobs. Some might have become guards, some farmers, some even beggars. But they did not forget. They did not forgive. For nearly 2 years they waited. Not loudly, not with shouts or swords, but quietly, carefully. They knew they were being watched, so they pretended to give up. Their leader, Oishi, walked through the city drunk, as if he had lost all dignity. Some of the Ronin became merchants. Others lived like commoners. They let the world think they were broken. But inside, they held on to one purpose. Revenge. Not for themselves, but for their lord. To restore his honor. Finally, on a snowy night in December, they acted. 47 men gathered in silence. They moved through the city to Kira's mansion. The snow muffled their steps. They attacked with precision. They avoided harm to servants and women. Their target was clear, Kira. They found him hiding. And there, they gave him the death he had avoided. A samurai's death. Then they took his head to their lord's grave, laid it there with deep bows, and surrendered. They had broken the law, but they had followed the code. The shogun faced a difficult choice. If he let them live, it would encourage more acts of revenge. If he punished them, it would dishonor their loyalty. In the end, he allowed them to die with dignity. They were ordered to commit seppuku one by one. And they did calmly, without protest. Their graves lie today at Sengakuji Temple in Tokyo. People still come to visit them, to place incense, to bow. But why does this story matter so much? Because it shows the heart of the samurai code, the tension between law and loyalty, between life and honor. These men knew they would die. They chose it, not in anger, but in quiet purpose. And perhaps that is why the tale still touches people, because it asks questions that are not easy to answer. What do we owe to those who shaped us? When is it right to obey and when to defy? Is honor worth more than life? These are not questions with simple answers. And that is part of their power. The Ronin do not shout. They do not explain. They act and fall silent. As you picture them now, 47 men kneeling in the snow, their faces calm, their path complete, you might feel a kind of stillness. A kind of peace. There is no need to cheer them or judge them. Only to watch, to remember, to understand. The snow falls gently on their graves. The incense smoke curls upward. The world moves on, but their story stays behind, quiet and steady. And so, as we leave the tale of the 47 Ronin behind, let us turn our gaze inward, past the famous names and solemn rituals, into the homes where these warriors once lived, into the spaces that held their secrets, where children once listened through sliding doors and shadows told their own silent stories. In the next segment, we will wander into hidden rooms and secret gardens and discover the quiet mysteries of the samurai house. Step gently now. We are no longer in the snow-covered city, but back inside a samurai home. The paper doors slide shut behind us. The sound of the outside world fades. We are surrounded again by quiet, careful spaces. But this time, we are not here to follow strict lessons or stand in perfect rows. This time, we are here to explore the parts of the samurai house that were hidden. The parts not everyone saw. The hidden rooms. The secret gardens. The places where silence had its own kind of voice. A samurai home was built for both beauty and defense. It was not a simple house. It was a world. A small universe of order and mystery. On the surface, it looked open and airy, with sliding doors and wide hallways. But behind those calm surfaces, there were corners that were meant to stay unseen. Imagine yourself walking through the main hall. You step on the tatami mats, careful not to scuff them. The walls are plain, white paper framed in dark wood. But there is more than meets the eye. One wall slides away to reveal a narrow passage. Too narrow for comfort. Just wide enough for someone to pass silently in the night. Some homes had trapdoors built into the floor. These were not just for storage. In times of danger, they were hiding spots. Or escape routes. A samurai might never need them, but they were always there, just in case. It was part of the mindset, always be ready, even in peace. There were listening holes in the walls too. Tiny, round gaps, often hidden behind decoration or in the folds of a screen. Through them, one could hear the softest whisper in another room. In a world of formality and caution, listening without being seen was sometimes a skill as valuable as sword fighting. In the private quarters, there might be a small alcove for tea utensils, or a shelf for favorite scrolls. But some of these were false. A shelf that opened like a door. A painting that swung away to reveal a shadowed niche. Not for treasure, necessarily. Often, these were used to store armor or messages, or something more personal. A keepsake from a lost friend, a letter never sent. Now let us move outside, but only a few steps. We come to the inner garden. These were not gardens for show. They were small, enclosed spaces. A patch of moss. A stone basin of water. A lantern made of worn granite. And always a few plants, perhaps a pine or bamboo or plum tree. These gardens were designed for quiet. For reflection. You could not see them from the street. They were not meant to impress strangers. They were for the family, and sometimes just for one person. A place to sit alone and think. Or not think. To watch the wind ripple the water. To listen to the soft rustle of bamboo leaves. These gardens were carefully controlled, but they were never perfect. Moss was allowed to grow where it wished. Stones were placed as if by chance, though they were not. The idea was to create beauty that felt natural, even though it was carefully designed. In a world where so much was rigid and planned, the garden was a quiet space of gentle freedom. In the evenings, the garden changed. The light faded. Lanterns cast soft shadows on the stepping stones. A small breeze might stir the curtain near the door. And someone might sit in silence, wrapped in a thin robe, their tea growing cold in the cup. It was in these moments that the weight of the day could settle, and sometimes lift. Even the rooms that faced the garden were special. The zashiki, or formal sitting room, was used for important meetings. But when not in use, it was often left empty. Not because no one wanted to be there, but because the emptiness itself was meaningful. A clean, open space allowed the mind to settle. It gave space for thought, for memory, for awareness. Children were not always allowed into these spaces. But they watched. From behind screens. From under the eaves. They learned how long to pause before speaking. How to fold a cloth just so. How to step into a garden without disturbing the quiet. There was a kind of gentle secrecy in these homes. Not secrecy to hide shame, but to preserve peace. To guard the inner life. The life of the mind. The inner calm that every samurai, no matter how rough on the battlefield, was expected to carry. And so, if you had lived in such a home, you might have passed 1,000 times by a door you never opened, or watched your father disappear into a room you never entered. You might have swept the stone path in the garden without ever knowing what lay beneath it. This mystery was part of life. You were not expected to know everything. You were expected to learn when to look, and when to lower your eyes. In this way, the home itself became a teacher. Not with words, but with space. With silence. With gentle hints that there is always more than what is seen. Now let yourself picture it clearly. A narrow hallway lit by paper lanterns. A hidden door half open. The quiet sound of wind chimes through an unseen window. A child peeking around a corner, unsure whether to step forward or wait. And somewhere, behind all that, a garden where moss grows thick in the shadow of stones. Let this image linger for a moment. Let the quiet wrap around you. Let the walls breathe with secrets, soft and slow. And when you are ready, we will move again. From the spaces of quiet and shadow to the textures and scents of daily life. The feel of straw mats under bare feet. The smell of glue and warm rice. The small details that shaped every day. In our next segment, we will sink gently into the smell of tatami and rice glue, the soft, steady rhythm of the samurai home. Breathe in slowly now. Let the world slow down with you. Let your thoughts move gently, like dust in a still room. We are not leaving the samurai home yet. In fact, we are stepping closer. Closer to the ground. To the quiet details. To the things people often overlook. Today we notice not swords or scrolls, but something softer. Something humbler. The scent of daily life. The textures beneath your hands. The smell of straw, the stickiness of rice glue, the grain of wood warmed by morning sun. Let us begin with the tatami. Tatami mats covered the floors of almost every samurai home. You never wore shoes on them. Only bare feet or soft white socks touched their surface. Tatami were made from rice straw, tightly bundled and stitched into thick rectangles. The top layer was woven with rush grass. When fresh, it was pale green and slightly shiny. With time, it faded to a soft golden brown. The smell was distinctive. Earthy, dry, a little sweet. Not strong, but always there. Especially in the mornings, when the house was still cool. If the windows were open, the scent mixed with the breeze. If it had rained the night before, the mats held the dampness gently, like a memory. You could not run across them without sound. Tatami creaked faintly under weight. That creaking told people where you were, how fast you moved, whether you were calm or in a hurry. Even in silence, the house spoke. To sit properly on tatami, you folded your legs beneath you in a formal position called seiza. It was not comfortable, but it was a kind of training, a way to teach patience. Children learned it early. Their knees ached. Their feet went numb, but they learned to sit still anyway. When the mats aged or tore, they were replaced. This was not done casually. A specialist would come and lift them, one by one. Underneath might be dust or a forgotten object, or even a message slipped between the floorboards. Each mat was fitted to its place. Each room had its own pattern, measured in jo, standard sizes. A room might be 6 mats, or 8, or 4.5. The number mattered. Some numbers were considered lucky. Others were not. Tatami were not only soft underfoot. They also helped control the air. They breathed in a way. They held warmth in winter and cooled the room in summer. They gave a slight spring to each step. A reminder that the ground beneath you was never quite still, but always quietly alive. Now shift your attention to another smell, rice glue. Rice glue was used for many things in a samurai house. To hold paper screens in place. To bind wood joints. To mount paintings and calligraphy. It was made by cooking rice until it broke down into starch, then mixing it with water into a sticky paste. When fresh, it had a soft, almost sweet scent, like warm rice left too long in the pot. When it dried, it became nearly invisible. But in the warm months or after rain, you could sometimes smell it again. It clung to the air faintly, a sign of the materials that held the house together. If you pressed your hand gently against a paper screen, and you weren't supposed to, but children always did, you might feel the places where the glue held the paper to the frame. Thin lines, almost like veins. It was delicate work, easily torn. But when made well, it lasted for years. Repairing the paper was a quiet task. Someone, often a woman or an elder, would sit with small tools and a fresh sheet. They would tear the new paper carefully, never cut it. Torn edges blend better than straight ones. Then they would brush a thin layer of rice glue along the frame, line up the paper, and press gently. The smell would rise in a soft puff. Warm, gentle, patient. The scent of rice glue mixed with many others. With the smoke from the hearth. With the steam of the bathhouse. With the faint pine scent of the garden outside. But it was always there in the background. Part of the home's quiet breath. There were other smells too. The dark wood of the beams, polished with age. The faint iron scent of old armor, stored in the closet. The waxy touch of candles made from tree sap. The salty tang of pickles stored in clay jars. Together, they formed the background music of life. Not loud, not sharp. Just there, steady and familiar. In many ways, these smells and textures shaped the samurai more than their weapons did. They reminded them of place, of role, of routine. A samurai might die in battle, but he lived on tatami. He bowed on tatami. He took tea, read poems, wrote letters, and watched the rain from behind a screen held together with rice glue. These soft things were not weak. They were strong in a quiet way. They held the world together, not with noise or fire, but with rhythm, with care, with presence. And now picture it again. You are sitting in a room with clean tatami. The sun filters through the paper screens. Somewhere nearby, someone is repairing a tear, and you can smell the warm glue on the air. You hear the soft creak of a footstep in the hall, the distant clink of a teacup being set down. Nothing urgent, nothing loud, only the steady heartbeat of a samurai home, held together by threads and straw and stillness. Now that you've felt the home from the inside, we are ready to leave its softness for a moment. To go outside again. Not into battle, not yet, but into the cool air before dawn. Where blades flash not in anger, but in practice. Where the body wakes before the sun does. In the next segment, we will rise with the day and join sword practice at sunrise. Wake gently now. Let the night fade behind your eyelids. Let the dreams drift away like mist from a quiet pond. The sun has not yet risen, but the day has already begun. The samurai do not wait for comfort. They rise before the light. Their breath is steady. Their minds already sharpened. It is time for sword practice. Not war. Not battle. Just the daily rhythm of preparation. Imagine it. You are barefoot on packed earth. The courtyard is still dark, but the eastern sky is starting to shift, just a little. Pale gray instead of black. The wind is light. Cool. You can hear the bamboo leaves tapping gently against the garden fence. You can hear the wooden sandals of a servant in the kitchen, far away. And then silence again. Except for your own breath. Your sword is not sharp. Not yet. This is not the blade you would take to war. It is a bakken, a wooden practice sword. The wood is dark, smooth, slightly heavy. You hold it with both hands. One near the base, one near the middle. Your arms ache already, though the lesson has not begun. Your teacher is silent too. He stands with his back straight, arms folded. Watching. You know better than to speak. The practice begins with stillness. You do not move until the teacher moves. When he bows, you bow. When he steps forward, you step forward. Everything is measured. Nothing is rushed. The first drills are simple. A slow swing downward. A turn of the hips. A return to ready stance. Over and over again. Not fast. Not wild. Just precise. The wooden blade cuts the air with a quiet wish. Your shoulders start to burn. You keep going. You are not swinging wildly. You are learning to cut cleanly. To move without wasting energy. To step exactly where you should. 1 inch wrong, and the strike is useless. 1 breath too early, and the timing is lost. Sometimes the teacher walks behind you. You cannot see him, but you feel his presence. He might tap your arm with a stick. Not cruelly, just to correct your form. He might say nothing at all, only waiting for you to fix the mistake yourself. The training continues. Next come the partner drills. You and another student face each other. You bow. You raise your bakken. One of you strikes, the other blocks. Not hard. This is not a fight. It is a slow dance of repetition. Strike, block. Step, turn. Your eyes do not leave each other. But your hearts are not enemies. You are helping each other train. You sweat. Even in the cold morning air, it gathers on your back, on your forehead. You are not allowed to wipe it away. You are not allowed to complain. You are learning to endure, to control your body, and even more importantly, your mind. And then the solo forms begin. Ka, a series of choreographed movements that you perform alone. Each kata tells a story, an invisible enemy, an imagined moment of danger. You bow, you draw the sword, you step, you cut, you turn, you breathe. No noise, no talking, just movement and breath. Even the birds have not started to sing yet. From the outside, it looks simple, but inside your mind, there is focus. You must remember every angle, every pause, where your foot lands, where your eyes go, the angle of the blade, the shape of the final bow. When the teacher nods, you bow again, lower this time, grateful the lesson is ending. Your arms are trembling, your legs are sore, but you do not show it. The sun is rising now. The edge of the roof glows faintly with gold. The courtyard is warming. A servant opens the shutters to the main hall. Breakfast is being prepared. Rice, pickles, perhaps a slice of dried fish. You step back into the house. You place your bakken carefully on the rack. You bow once more, this time to the dojo itself, the training space. You bow because it has shaped you. Slowly, painfully, but truly. Sword practice was not about strength alone. It was about control, grace, awareness. Even in the darkest hours, a trained samurai was expected to move without fear, without anger, without hesitation. Not just because of skill, but because of daily, quiet discipline. Morning after morning, strike after strike. And even if you never go to war, you still practice. Because sword work is also mind work. Because it teaches more than how to cut. It teaches how to stand, how to wait, how to choose the right moment. The courtyard is empty now. Only faint footprints remain in the dust. The training is over, but the stillness it leaves behind is part of the house now. It lingers in the halls. It settles in the corners. And perhaps it settles in you too. A stillness earned. A silence shaped by effort. A calmness that is not weakness, but strength. Let that feeling stay with you as we move onward. As the sun rises fully and the house comes to life, we will shift our focus again. This time to a woman. One who defied expectations. One who took up the sword not as a symbol, but as a way of life. In the next segment, we meet the woman who became a samurai. The sun is higher now. The morning mist has lifted. The sword rack is still. The echoes of training fade into the quiet hum of daily tasks. But now, we step away from the courtyard, away from the routine, and toward a story that is harder to find. A story that doesn't always appear in the scrolls or the lesson books. A woman, and not just a wife or a daughter or a quiet observer behind the screen. This woman was a samurai. In the world of feudal Japan, women were often expected to be unseen. Silent, graceful, obedient. They were raised to support, not to lead. To serve, not to fight. And yet, history remembers more than one who stepped beyond those rules. Who trained in the same arts. Who picked up the sword, not in dreams, but in real life. Tonight, let us meet one of them. Her name was Nakano Takiko. She lived in the mid-1800s, during the final years of the samurai age. Japan was changing. Western powers were arriving. The old world was crumbling. But Nakano's story feels older than that. It feels like it could have happened 100 years earlier, behind those same paper walls, with the same morning sword practice and the same quiet pressure. Takiko was born into a samurai family. Her father, a government official, died early. Her mother raised her, and her uncle took on her education. He was not just a scholar. He taught her martial arts, strategy, calligraphy, philosophy. She read the Confucian classics. She studied Onabu geisha, the warrior tradition for women. And she excelled. Not just quietly, not in the background. She was skilled with the naginata, a long pole weapon with a curved blade. It became her companion. She practiced daily. She moved through forms with grace and control. She taught others. She became known not just as a scholar, but as a fighter. Still, the world around her was not ready. Women were not supposed to fight. But when war came to her doorstep, she didn't ask for permission. The Boshin War broke out in 1868. It was a civil war. Old ways against new. The Tokugawa shogunate against the forces wanting to restore power to the emperor. It was not a quiet time. It was not a peaceful time. Castles burned. Streets turned to ash. And the samurai were caught in the storm. Nakano was in the Eizu domain. It was loyal to the shogunate. And when the imperial army marched in, her people took up arms. Most of the men went to fight. But so did Nakano. She gathered a group of women. Some young, some married, all ready to protect their home. They wore white headbands. They tied their hair high to keep it out of their eyes. They carried naginata, spears, and blades. They called themselves the Joshitai, or Women's Army. And they did not hide behind the walls. They entered the battlefield. Nakano led them herself. She was 21. Calm. Focused. She fought not in fear, but with control. Witnesses said she moved like a shadow, precise and unflinching. She cut down enemy soldiers. She defended the gates. She held the line. But war is not kind, no matter how skilled you are. In the middle of the fight, Nakano was struck by a bullet. She did not fall immediately. She turned to her younger sister and gave her a final command, to cut off her head and bury it, so the enemy would not take it as a trophy. Her sister obeyed. Nakano's head was buried beneath a pine tree, near the battlefield. A grave was made later, and a statue now stands in her memory. Not grand, not loud, but steady, like her. Her story is not the only one. Other women fought. Some trained quietly their whole lives. Others defended castles when the men were gone. But Nakano's story remains one of the clearest, because she did not hide it. She stepped forward. She lived and died with the same discipline, the same code, the same calm honor as any samurai. And still, she was more than a fighter. She was a teacher, a writer, a sister. Her life reminds us that the samurai world, strict as it was, had room, even if narrow, for those who dared to live differently. You might picture her now, standing in the morning light. A white sash tied tightly at her waist. A naginata in her hand. The same quiet focus in her eyes that you saw in the men practicing with wooden swords at dawn. But her path was harder, because she carried not just the weapon, but the weight of being unexpected, uninvited, and yet still present. In the stillness of her story, you might hear something powerful. The sound of someone making space, quietly but firmly, with grace, with discipline, with purpose. And when her voice is gone, the wind moves through the pine trees again. The battlefield grows quiet. The headband lies in the dust. But her story remains. Now we will leave her behind, gently, and return to the world she lived in, to the home she passed, to the armor worn by those around her. In our next segment, we go back to the tools of the warrior, but not the weapons. This time, we learn how they cleaned armor, the quiet care behind the shine of the battlefield. We have left the battlefield now. The shouts have faded. The smoke has lifted. The clanging of steel and the rush of feet are only memories. We return to the quiet places, to a room with low wooden beams and filtered light, to a space that smells of oil, metal, and lacquered wood. This is not a space of war. It is a space of care, because even the armor of a samurai needed peace. Let us begin with the image. A full suit of samurai armor, resting on a wooden stand. It gleams softly in the light, not like polished glass, but like something old and proud. The plates are dark, sometimes black, sometimes red. The cords that bind them are woven from silk or cotton, faded in some places from sweat and sun. The helmet sits like a crown, its curved crest rising gently, like horns or wings, or the curve of a rising wave. But beneath all of that beauty was something simple: dirt, sweat, dust from the road, ash from fires, bits of grass and hair caught in the seams. Every battle left its mark. Even training left smudges. And that is where the quiet work began. Cleaning armor was not fast. It was not loud. It took time, and hands that were steady. Often, a lower-ranking samurai or a trusted servant was given the task. In smaller households, the warrior cleaned their own gear. They would kneel beside the armor stand, unwrap each part slowly. First, the chest plate. Then the kote, the arm guards. The sunniate, the shin guards. The kabuto, the helmet. Each piece was removed with care, as if the armor were still alive. The materials varied. Some parts were made of iron plates, others of leather, hardened with layers of lacquer. Some had delicate lacing, colorful cords that held the plates together. These cords soaked up sweat. Dust gathered in their threads. Over time, they stiffened and cracked if not cared for. The first task was always wiping. A soft cloth, often made of cotton, dampened slightly. The goal was to remove the surface dirt without scratching the lacquer. No harsh rubbing, just smooth circular strokes. The iron was wiped, the cords brushed with soft tools like tiny brooms or even fingers. Oil came next. A light layer of camellia oil was often used to protect the metal. It was dabbed gently onto a cloth and rubbed in with even movements. Not too much. Just enough to keep rust away. The smell of camellia oil was soft, floral, and faintly sweet. In a quiet room, it filled the space like incense. For the cords, special attention was needed. If they were silk, they could not be scrubbed. They had to be brushed lightly with a dry brush or carefully loosened and aired out. If they were damaged, they were removed and replaced. Relacing armor was a skill of its own. It required hours, days sometimes. Each cord passed through tiny holes. Pulled tight, tied with exact knots, arranged in patterns that followed old traditions. Red and blue, black and gold. Even the color had meaning. The helmet was cleaned last. It was the most visible piece, and often the most decorative. Some had crests made of carved wood or metal. Some had horns, dragons, or rising suns. These pieces were dusted and oiled, their edges checked for cracks or wear. The inside, where the head rested, was wiped gently. Sweat soaked into the lining. Sometimes, a bit of charcoal was placed inside to absorb the scent. The mask, if there was one, was treated with the same care. These Menpo masks often looked fierce, with snarling mouths and mustaches made of horsehair. But when cleaned, they were handled like fine porcelain. Because once the battle ended, the mask became just another face to tend to. When all parts were clean, the armor was reassembled slowly. Piece by piece. The stand waited patiently. The chest plate was hung first. Then the sleeves, the guards, the helmet. Sometimes, a thin cloth was draped over the whole set to protect it from dust. The room where this happened was often quiet. No music, no talking, just the sound of cloth on metal, of laces tightening, of breath slowing. It was almost like a ritual, a form of meditation, because cleaning armor was not only about keeping it ready, it was also about respect. Respect for the craft, for the maker whose hands shaped each plate, for the materials drawn from earth and water and plant, for the warrior whose body it had protected, and for the silence that followed every act of violence. Some samurai were buried with their armor. Others left it behind, passed down to sons or students. Some armor sets still exist today, not in battle, but in museums. When you see them, you might admire their beauty. But you now know something more. You know the hours that went into every surface, the careful hands, the patience, the quiet. Even in a world filled with war and death, there was space for this, for cloth and oil and silence. And so, as you picture the armor now, freshly cleaned, resting in the soft light of afternoon, you might feel a kind of peace. Because behind every clash and cry, there was this room, this care, this stillness. Let us carry that stillness forward, from armor to art, from tools of war to tools of the soul. In our next segment, we will explore something gentler, something many samurai turned to when words failed and swords were sheathed. Set your weapon down now. Let your shoulders relax. The armor is clean. The sword is sheathed. The house is quiet. The garden stirs gently in the breeze. It is time to speak without shouting, to express without force. Because not all warriors fought with steel. Some fought with words, with silence, with the space between lines. Welcome to the world of haiku. Haiku are small poems. Very small. Just 3 lines. 17 syllables in total. 575. They are short but not simple. A good haiku captures a moment so perfectly that nothing more needs to be said. It shows something tiny, a frog jumping into a pond, a petal drifting on the wind, and in that moment reveals something deep. Samurai were trained to write haiku, not as a decoration, but as part of their mental discipline. Poetry helped shape their thoughts, their attention, their sense of timing. A warrior needed to strike at the right moment. A poet needed to write at the right moment. Both required calm. Both required focus. Let us imagine one now. A samurai sitting by candlelight, long after practice has ended. His brush is soft, made of animal hair. His ink stone holds a pool of black liquid, ground from a solid block. He dips the brush, lets a drop fall, then begins to write. He writes not about swords, not about blood, but about the moon shining through clouds, or about the sound of wind in bamboo. He writes about things that are passing, fleeting, beautiful not because they last, but because they do not. One famous samurai, Matsuo Basho, became one of the greatest haiku poets of all time. Though he was not a famous general or powerful warlord, his legacy lives in lines like, an old silent pond, a frog jumps into the sound, of water, so small, so simple, yet it slows the mind. It invites you to pause, to listen, To see. Haiku was also used in war. Sometimes, samurai wrote poems before battle, or even before death. These were called jisei, or death poems. They were not sad. Not always. They were composed with dignity, with calm, with acceptance. One warrior, before dying in battle, wrote, "Had I not known that I was dead already, I would have mourned my loss." Another wrote, "As leaves fall, so do I," returning to the root. These are not cries. They are not pleas. They are reflections. A way to hold on to one last thought. To leave behind a small window into the soul. Not all samurai were great poets, but they were expected to try, to read, to understand. Poetry was part of education. Like calligraphy, like sword practice, like tea ceremony, it shaped the rhythm of their minds. There is something calming in this. Knowing that even in a world where life could end quickly, men and women still stopped to notice the way light moved on a floor, or how the plum blossoms fell after rain, or the silence just before a storm. Haiku teaches restraint. You cannot explain everything in 17 syllables. You must choose carefully. Let go of what is not needed. In this way, it was much like the samurai life itself, controlled, focused, aware of impermanence. You can try it yourself. Close your eyes. Breathe in. Notice one sound, one shape, one small thing. Then say what you saw. Not with decoration, not with explanation, just the thing itself. Like this. Snow on the armor. Melts slowly in the sunlight. No more war today. Or, bamboo does not shout, but bends with every strong wind, and still does not break. This is haiku. This is the samurai mind at rest. Not empty but still. Not loud but aware. In the evenings, samurai gathered to read poems aloud. Sometimes under lantern light. Sometimes during long travels. They passed around paper slips with poems written in soft brushstrokes. They bowed their heads in appreciation, not praise. No applause. Just stillness. Even today, many people in Japan, and around the world, still write haiku. Not to be famous. Not to impress. But to slow down. To notice. To connect. As you sit now, perhaps your own breath has slowed. Perhaps your thoughts have softened. This is the work of poetry. Not to excite, but to quiet. Not to stir up feelings, but to settle them. Let the words drift like leaves on water. Let the silence between them hold you. Now that we've listened to the stillness of the samurai heart, we will return to a different kind of silence. A heavier one. The kind that comes after war, after loss, after centuries of memory. In our next segment, we will travel back even further into legend and sorrow. We will walk among spirits and shadows in the ghosts of the Genpei War. Now walk slowly. The ground beneath your feet feels older somehow. Softer. Worn down by footsteps that came long before yours. The air is cool, still, and touched with something unseen. Something not quite memory, not quite dream. In this quiet hour, we begin to hear the distant sounds of a war long past. A war that left behind more than stories. It left behind ghosts. This is the Genpei War. A real war, but one surrounded by mist and legend. It began in the year 1180 and lasted for 5 long, bitter years. 2 powerful families fought for control of Japan, the Taira and the Minamoto. These were not petty disputes. This was a full civil war. A war that changed the future of Japan. But we will not focus on battles or victories. We will focus on what remained. The silence after the fighting. The haunting after the loss. The Taira were elegant, refined, deeply connected to the imperial court. The Minamoto were strong, sharp, and determined. Their feud pulled in lords, warriors, farmers, even monks. Cities burned. Castles fell. Rivers ran red. But beneath the clashing of swords and the shouting of names, something else stirred. Fear. Grief. Regret. And over time, those emotions turned into stories. Stories of ghosts. One of the most famous tells of the Battle of Dan no Yura. It was the final battle of the Genpei War, fought in 1185 on the sea. The Minamoto fleet faced the Taira navy near a narrow strait. The waves were rough. The wind was sharp. The Taira carried something precious on their ships, the young emperor, just a child. Only 6 years old. Dressed in court robes. Crowned but too small to understand why. As the tide turned, the Taira began to lose. Their ships were rammed. Arrows flew. Many warriors jumped into the sea to avoid capture. And then, one of the most tragic moments in Japanese history. The emperor's grandmother, knowing they had lost, lifted the boy in her arms and leapt into the sea with him. They drowned together. The sea swallowed the empire. After that battle, people said the waters of Dan no Yura were cursed, that the spirits of the drowned still rose with the tide. Fishermen spoke of strange lights under the waves, of ghostly music drifting across the water, of blind monks reciting prayers on the shore to keep the souls at rest. One famous tale tells of a monk named Hoichi. He was blind but played the biwa, a stringed instrument, with great skill. He sang of the Genpei War, of honor and loss, his voice rich with sorrow. One night, a ghost came to him, not as a monster, but as a soldier in full armor. The spirit asked Hoichi to perform for the court of the dead. And so, each night, Hoichi followed the ghost, unaware he was being led to a graveyard. There, surrounded by tombstones, he played for the spirits of the Terra, seated as if still living. They listened. They wept. They remembered. When monks found him, Hoichi was pale and shaking. They painted sacred words across his body to protect him. But they forgot his ears. That night, the ghost returned, and finding only his ears visible, tore them from his head. The story is told not to scare, but to explain something deeper, that sorrow lingers. That the past does not always stay buried. That memory, especially when shaped by loss, becomes something that walks beside us. Many temples were built after the Genpei War to honor the dead. Some were built over mass graves, others near battlefields. People brought offerings. Rice, incense, folded paper cranes. They bowed their heads. They whispered prayers. Not just for peace, but for forgiveness. Because even samurai, even the most disciplined and controlled, feared ghosts. Not just spirits of the dead, but the echo of their own choices. The look in the eyes of someone defeated. The silence after a scream. The dreams that came again and again, long after the fighting ended. In the centuries that followed, ghost stories from the Genpei War became part of Japanese culture. They were written in plays, performed by dancers, painted in shadowy ink on scrolls. They were not dismissed as superstition. They were reminders that every blade leaves a shadow, that every victory comes at a cost. Some say that on quiet nights, if you stand by the sea and listen carefully, you can still hear the waves repeating the names of those lost. Not shouting them, whispering. Even today, at Dan no Yura, the sea moves gently over the stones. The water is clear, the wind soft. But the stories remain. Not loud, not frightening, just present, like a breath you didn't know you were holding. And perhaps that is what history truly is. Not dates or battles, but the lingering of what once was. The invisible weight we carry. The voices we cannot hear, but somehow still feel. Let that feeling stay with you. Let it settle. Let it guide you back into the quiet of daily life. Because next, we return to the samurai household. But now, with deeper understanding, we explore how these echoes of memory, of control, of structure were passed into daily habits, even into prompting. In our next segment, we explore how discipline shaped thinking itself. Take a breath. Let the stories of ghosts fade like mist on a river. The sea is calm now. The past is quiet again. We return to the samurai home, but not to the sword rack or the garden or the training yard. We return to the mind, to the way a samurai thought. Not just how they acted or fought, but how they observed, reflected, and expressed ideas. Because for the samurai, clarity was power, and that clarity was built on discipline. In this segment, we will explore how the same habits that shaped the warrior's hand also shaped their thinking, their writing, even their instructions. In a way, you could say samurai were early masters of prompting. Not for computers, of course, but for people, for records, for themselves. So what does prompting mean here? Imagine you are preparing for a long journey. You must give instructions to those who will stay behind. Your house must be cleaned in your absence. Supplies managed. Letters written. Rice accounted for. You cannot speak every day, so your words must do the work. A prompt in this context is a clear message, a task defined, a question framed with precision. And a samurai had to be very good at this, or things fell apart. They learned early that vague thoughts led to vague outcomes. You do not tell a servant simply, clean the house. You say, sweep the front step at sunrise. Wipe the screens with damp cloth before midday. Air out the tatami on the third morning. Do not disturb the incense shelf. Notice the structure, time, action, detail, caution. This is a prompt, a well-shaped instruction, one that leaves no doubt, one that respects the task and the person doing it. The same method was used in writing letters. Samurai correspondence was formal, structured, polite. but also deeply practical. A letter might begin with a seasonal reference, then move to purpose, request, reasoning, and closing thanks. Everything in its place. Every sentence chosen. Even in poetry, the same care applied. A haiku, as you may recall, is a tiny prompt to the reader's mind. It says, notice this. Not everything. Just this. A frog. A breeze. A fallen blossom. That is all. This habit of detail extended into military plans, family documents, and even daily journals. Many samurai kept records of their thoughts. Not as confessions, but as reflections. They noted the weather, the mood of the household, a lesson learned during sword practice, a mistake made and corrected. They described exactly what happened, not just how they felt. Why such care? Because the samurai life was narrow. Mistakes could be fatal. A wrong word could lead to insult. A delay could cause disaster. And so thinking clearly, and expressing that thought clearly, became a quiet art of survival. Imagine a samurai preparing for battle. He must leave behind instructions for his household. He does not say, do your best. He says, if I do not return by the third moon, send word to Kyoto. Feed the horse sparingly. Burn the letter I left in the drawer. Do not wear mourning clothes until the temple bell has sounded twice. Every word matters. Every word carries weight. And now let us shift that thinking into modern terms. When you prompt an AI, or write a request, or give directions to someone, your goal is the same. Clarity, respect, structure. Instead of saying, draw me something, say, create a black and white image of a samurai standing in a bamboo forest, with wind blowing from the left and a distant mountain in the background. Time, action, detail, caution, just like the samurai letter. Or if you want to write a story, do not say, make it interesting. Say, write a slow-paced historical tale set in 13th century Japan, focused on a retired warrior reflecting on a lost battle. When you shape your prompt with precision, you honor the task. You give the system, or the reader, or the listener, a clear path to follow. And more than that, you shape your own mind. You begin to think in patterns. You begin to plan your thoughts, to slow them down, to arrange them, to see the edges of your ideas more clearly. That is the heart of samurai discipline. Not just doing things right, but thinking them through. Not just reacting, but preparing. Not just knowing, but expressing with purpose. You can practice this. Even now, take a moment. Think of something simple you want: a story, an image, a reminder. Try to write it as if you were leaving a note in a quiet room. As if someone would find it after you were gone, and follow your words exactly. What would you say? What would you include? What would you leave out? In this way, you are not just learning about the past. You are borrowing its quiet strength, its focus, its stillness. The samurai knew that swords rust, armor fades, and fame disappears. But a well-shaped thought, written clearly, shared respectfully, can last longer than steel. And so, as we leave this segment, let that calm shape remain in your thinking. Let your prompts, like your movements, be measured. Let your thoughts, like your haiku, be short and strong. In the next segment, we return to ritual, to the art of silence, to the practice that taught warriors to listen more than they spoke. Now let your thoughts settle. Let your breath slow down again. You have left the sword behind. You have cleaned your armor. You have shaped your words. There is no need to hurry. This moment is not for fighting. It is for something smaller, older, and gentler. You are about to take part in a tea ceremony. To someone outside this world, it might seem simple, just making tea, just drinking from a cup. But for the samurai, tea was a way of life, a form of quiet discipline, a ritual that taught patience, respect, and stillness. So step inside. The door is small. You must bow to enter. That is the first lesson. Humility. The room is not large, maybe just 2 or 3 mats wide. The walls are made of wood and paper. There is a scroll hanging in the corner, a single word written in perfect brushstrokes. It might say calm, or emptiness, or path. There is a flower too, just one, not arranged for beauty, but for balance. Not loud, not perfect, just present. You kneel. Your legs fold under you. Your hands rest on your thighs. The host greets you with a bow, not with words. Everything is quiet. Even the birds outside seem to lower their voices. The tools are already set out. A small bamboo whisk, a lacquered tea bowl, a wooden scoop, a black ceramic pot holding powdered green tea matcha. The movements begin. Slow, exact. The host does not rush. Every gesture is rehearsed but never stiff. They wipe the bowl with a soft cloth. They ladle water from the iron kettle. Steam rises but does not speak. The tea is made with care. 2 scoops of powder. A small stream of hot water. The whisk moves in a gentle zigzag. The green froth forms at the surface. When ready, the bowl is placed before you. You bow. You lift it with both hands. You turn it slightly. You drink. The taste is bitter, earthy, alive. You set the bowl down slowly. Bow again. Say nothing. There is no conversation here. No laughter. No distraction. Just the sound of the ladle, the water, the quiet breath of the room. This is Shinoyo, the way of tea. It is not about the drink. It is about presence. About noticing. About giving attention to every part of the moment. The texture of the cup. The curve of the whisk. The feel of the mat beneath your knees. Samurai studied this ritual as seriously as swordsmanship. Not because they were expected to entertain guests, but because tea taught control. It taught timing, precision, awareness. The same skills used in battle, only softer, deeper, more inward. The tea room was also a space of peace. Once you stepped inside, your rank was left outside. A lord, a farmer, a monk, all sat the same way. All followed the same rhythm. There was no armor here. No weapons. Even the sword was removed before entering. Nothing was allowed to break the stillness. Great generals held tea ceremonies before battles. Not to show off, not to celebrate, but to calm their minds, to bring silence into the noise that would soon follow. A reminder that beauty could still exist in a broken world. And perhaps that is why the way of tea survived, even as the samurai age ended. Because it was never truly about war. It was about how to live, how to listen, how to be with others, even in silence. You might feel that now, even across time. This gentle rhythm, this quiet space, a few simple tools, a few careful movements, and a mind slowly, gently settling. Today, people still practice the tea ceremony. The bowls are different. The scrolls have new words. But the spirit is the same. Slow down. Pay attention. Share the moment. It is a kind of prompting too, but not for action. For presence. So let yourself imagine this room one more time. The scent of steam. The warmth of the cup. The sound of a drop of water falling into the kettle. And in that moment, you need nothing else. No rush. No plan. Just quiet. As we leave this space, do so gently. Step out of the tea room the way you came, bowed slightly, grateful, a little more aware than before. In the next segment, we shift again, this time toward myth and misunderstanding. Because while the samurai were real, their stories were often tangled with those of others. Warriors who moved in the dark, who crept through walls, who disappeared like smoke. In segment, we explore the truth behind the mystery in ninja myths versus reality. Now let your thoughts settle. Let your breath slow down again. You have left the sword behind. You have cleaned your armor. You have shaped your words. There is no need to hurry. This moment is not for fighting. It is for something smaller, older, and gentler. You are about to take part in a tea ceremony. To someone outside this world, it might seem simple, just making tea, just drinking from a cup. But for the samurai, tea was a way of life. A form of quiet discipline. A ritual that taught patience, respect, and stillness. So step inside. The door is small. You must bow to enter. That is the first lesson. Humility. The room is not large. Maybe just 2 or 3 mats wide. The walls are made of wood and paper. There is a scroll hanging in the corner, a single word written in perfect brushstrokes. It might say calm, or emptiness, or path. There is a flower too. Just one. Not arranged for beauty, but for balance. Not loud. Not perfect. Just present. You kneel. Your legs fold under you. Your hands rest on your thighs. The host greets you with a bow, not with words. Everything is quiet. Even the birds outside seem to lower their voices. The tools are already set out. A small bamboo whisk. A lacquered tea bowl. A wooden scoop. A black ceramic pot holding powdered green tea matcha. The movements begin. Slow. Exact. The host does not rush. Every gesture is rehearsed, but never stiff. They wipe the bowl with a soft cloth. They ladle water from the iron kettle. Steam rises, but does not speak. The tea is made with care. 2 scoops of powder. A small stream of hot water. The whisk moves in a gentle zigzag. The green froth forms at the surface. When ready, the bowl is placed before you. You bow. You lift it with both hands. You turn it slightly. You drink. The taste is bitter, earthy, alive. You set the bowl down slowly. Bow again. Say nothing. There is no conversation here. No laughter. No distraction. Just the sound of the ladle, the water, the quiet breath of the room. This is Shinoyo, the way of tea. It is not about the drink. It is about presence. About noticing. About giving attention to every part of the moment. The texture of the cup. The curve of the whisk. The feel of the mat beneath your knees. Samurai studied this ritual as seriously as swordsmanship. Not because they were expected to entertain guests, but because tea taught control. It taught timing, precision, awareness. The same skills used in battle, only softer, deeper, more inward. The tea room was also a space of peace. Once you stepped inside, your rank was left outside. A lord, a farmer, a monk, all sat the same way. All followed the same rhythm. There was no armor here. No weapons. Even the sword was removed before entering. Nothing was allowed to break the stillness. Great generals held tea ceremonies before battles. Not to show off, not to celebrate, but to calm their minds, to bring silence into the noise that would soon follow. A reminder that beauty could still exist in a broken world. And perhaps that is why the way of tea survived, even as the samurai age ended. Because it was never truly about war. It was about how to live, how to listen, how to be with others, even in silence. You might feel that now, even across time. This gentle rhythm, this quiet space, a few simple tools, a few careful movements, and a mind slowly, gently settling. Today, people still practice the tea ceremony. The bowls are different, the scrolls have new words, but the spirit is the same. Slow down, pay attention, share the moment. It is a kind of prompting too, but not for action, for presence. So let yourself imagine this room one more time. The scent of steam, the warmth of the cup, the sound of a drop of water falling into the kettle. And in that moment, you need nothing else. No rush, no plan, just quiet. As we leave this space, do so gently. Step out of the tea room the way you came, bowed slightly, grateful, a little more aware than before. In the next segment, we shift again, this time toward myth and misunderstanding. Because while the samurai were real, their stories were often tangled with those of others. Warriors who moved in the dark, who crept through walls, who disappeared like smoke. The shadows have faded now. The footsteps of the ninja have disappeared into the earth. It is quiet again, but not empty. Now we enter a different kind of silence. One filled not with fear, but with thought. Not with movement, but with meaning. You are in a temple now. The floor is cool under your knees. Incense curls into the air like soft smoke rising from a forgotten fire. The walls are lined with scrolls. Candles flicker. A monk chants in a low voice, slow and steady, like a stream that has flowed forever. This is where many samurai came, not to fight but to learn, to study, to reflect. And often they read the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra is one of the most important texts in Mahayana Buddhism. It is not a book of rules. It is not a story with heroes and villains. It is a teaching, deep, quiet, and layered. It speaks of compassion, of patience, of the hidden potential inside every person. The sutra says that even the smallest act of kindness matters. That every person, no matter how lowly or lost, can awaken. That truth is not always loud. Sometimes it is soft and simple and slow. Samurai were drawn to this message, even though their lives were filled with violence. The sword and the sutra might seem like opposites, but for the samurai, they were both paths to understanding. Many samurai followed Zen Buddhism, which emphasizes stillness and simplicity. But others turned to the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, which encouraged mercy, endurance, and inner strength. Imagine a warrior who has seen many battles. His armor is worn. His body aches. He has lost friends. He carries burdens. In the quiet of the temple, he reads the words of the sutra. The light of wisdom shines equally on all. He thinks of his enemies. He thinks of the farmers he once passed without seeing. He thinks of the servant who brought him tea. The sutra teaches that no one is beyond awakening. Not even him. This changes something inside. For some, the Lotus Sutra became more than a book. It became a guide. Its stories and parables gave shape to their decisions. It reminded them to see beyond pride, to question anger, to offer help even when no one was watching. One famous story from the Lotus Sutra is the parable of the burning house. In it, a father sees his house on fire. His children are playing inside unaware. They will not come out, even when he calls. So he tells them there are toys waiting outside, carts pulled by deer, goats, and oxen. The children run out and are saved. But there are no toys, just safety. The parable teaches that sometimes people need different paths to reach truth. That what matters is getting out of danger, not how. Samurai who read this story saw its wisdom. They knew the world was full of burning houses, greed, anger, war. They saw themselves as both the children and the father. Lost at times, saving others at others, always learning. They also copied the sutra by hand, slowly, brushstroke by brushstroke, each character written with care. Not for practice, but for devotion. The act of writing was a form of meditation, a quiet offering. In some temples, you can still see these scrolls, faded but strong, ink lines shaped by hands that once held swords. You can also hear the chanting. Even now, monks gather to recite the words. They sit in straight lines. Their voices rise and fall like waves. Not rushing, not dragging, just flowing. Nam-myo Horenjikyo. This chant, repeated again and again, means, I devote myself to the Lotus Sutra. It is not a magic spell. It is a promise, a way of steadying the mind, of choosing peace again and again, even in the middle of chaos. Some samurai chanted it before battles. Others whispered it as they died. Not out of fear, but as a way of letting go. So what does this mean for you? Perhaps you are not holding a sword. Perhaps you are not kneeling in a temple. But the lesson remains. Take a moment to reflect. Notice your thoughts. Are they loud? Scattered? Pulling you in every direction? Now repeat something simple. A phrase. A breath. A small promise. I will be patient. I will look closely. I will shape my words with care. This is your sutra for the night. Your way of returning to center. The samurai lived in a world of pressure, danger, and control. But in the pages of the Lotus Sutra, they found softness. They found space. They found something bigger than themselves. As we move forward, that quiet will come with us. But so will the hunger, the winter, the body's needs. Because in the next segment, we look at something simple, food. Or rather, the lack of it. The candle burns low now. The temple is far behind you. The scrolls are rolled and resting. The silence of the Lotus Sutra has settled in your chest like warm ash. But the body has its own needs. It remembers what the spirit forgets. Cold hands, a hollow stomach, the sharp pinch of hunger. Let us talk now about food. Not a feast. Not rice piled high or fresh fish sizzling over coals. Not comfort or celebration. But the other kind of meal, the ones that were missing. The winters that stretched too long. The rules that tightened. The samurai diet was not one of pleasure. It was one of restraint, scarcity, and sometimes quiet suffering. Many imagine that the samurai, as elites, always ate well. That they had servants, banquets, endless supplies of rice and sake. But the truth is more complicated. A samurai's life was not ruled by appetite. It was ruled by discipline, duty, and often the weather. Let us begin in the kitchen of a small samurai house. It is early winter. The hearth burns gently in the corner, fed with scraps of pine. The rice jar is low. The pickled vegetables are already sour. You hear the creak of the pantry door, the quiet sigh of a mother calculating what is left. A typical samurai meal was modest. A bowl of rice, a small plate of pickled radish, maybe a few shavings of dried fish. Hot water with miso paste stirred in. That was enough. It had to be. Meat was rare, especially in times of peace. Buddhist influence made animal flesh taboo in many periods. Samurai did not live on meat and heavy stews like knights in Europe. Their bodies were lean. Their energy came from rice, barley, beans, and wild greens. In the countryside, they might forage, gathering edible leaves, digging up mountain roots, cutting strips of kelp from the sea. These were dried and saved for the cold months. Nothing was wasted. Fish bones became soup. Daikon leaves became pickles. Even chestnuts were ground into flour when rice was short. But during war or after a poor harvest, there was not enough. Winter was the hardest. Fields stood empty. Roads were blocked. Trade slowed. Families relied on what they had preserved: dried persimmons, fermented soybeans, buried jars of salted plums. A winter without stores was a winter of hunger. And yet, even then, there were rules. A samurai could not eat until his lord had eaten. A samurai wife waited until her husband and children were fed. Servants ate last. Everything moved in order according to rank. In some houses, children were taught to chew each bite 30 times. Not as a game, but as a way to make the food last. to make the body believe it was full. When food was shared, it was with reverence. Rice was not scooped carelessly. It was pressed gently, shaped, offered with both hands. Even one grain left in a bowl was a sign of disrespect. Not to the cook, to the rice itself. There was another reason for the strict diet: readiness. A bloated warrior cannot fight. A sleepy soldier is a dead one. The samurai were trained to eat just enough, never too much. They believed that hunger kept the mind sharp, that comfort made the body lazy. To be slightly hungry was to be alert. In training, young boys often fasted for a day or two. They learned to ignore the rumble of the stomach, to find strength in the weakness, to move even when they ached. And yet, when the chance came, they also knew how to be grateful. New Year's meals were sacred. A bowl of white rice steamed in bamboo, a slice of grilled fish, sweet black beans for health, a tiny mochi cake, soft and chewy. These were not luxuries, they were blessings, proof that the household had survived another year. Even then, the celebration was quiet. No shouting, no overeating, just soft words, full bowls, a prayer whispered toward the fire. During famines, samurai did not always fare better than peasants. In fact, many lords demanded food from their vassals, leaving little for the families who worked the fields. In some winters, records tell of samurai selling their swords for sacks of rice, or giving up armor to buy dried fish. Pride could not fill a bowl. In times of peace, food became ritual again. Meals were served on black lacquer trays, each dish in its own space. Soup on the right, rice on the left, pickles at the top. A visual balance that reflected a deeper one, between body and spirit, between fullness and humility. Today, you can still see echoes of this in traditional Japanese meals. The careful arrangement, the quiet pause before eating, the phrase "itadakamasu," I humbly receive. Not just food, but the effort behind it, the life that became it, the hand that prepared it. So as you sit here now, you might think of your own meals. Do you rush? Do you notice? Do you give thanks? You do not need to live like a samurai, but you can borrow their mindfulness, their respect for what sustains, their awareness that even the smallest bowl carries more than flavor. It carries survival. As this segment ends, you may feel a quiet ache, a reminder that even warriors were human, that under the armor was a body that hungered, a body that waited for spring. Next, we return to the inner world again, to habits not of the mouth, but of the mind. In segment 15, we explore how quiet conflict and personal reflection shaped how samurai, and we prompt the world around us. The wind outside is soft again. The candle burns lower, its wax slowly folding in upon itself. Inside this dim and silent space, you are beginning to notice something. A pattern, a rhythm, a way of living that does not rush, does not shout, does not announce itself. In this segment, we explore how samurai handled conflict, not with swords or shouting, but with structure, silence, and subtlety. Because not every battle was fought on a field. Some were fought with posture, with words, with silence, with well-shaped rituals. You might be wondering how this connects to prompting. But consider this. Every request, every plan, every command is a kind of proposal, a prompt. And in a world as structured and cautious as a samurai's, prompting was never just about giving orders. It was about asking without overstepping, suggesting without shame, communicating without causing open conflict. Let's begin with the idea of taitmei and han. In Japanese culture, both past and present, taitmei means the public face, the polite mask, the formal way things are presented. Han is the true feeling, the honest opinion, the private truth underneath. In a samurai household, these two layers were essential. They allowed people to live together, even when their desires or beliefs clashed. If a younger samurai thought his elder was wrong, he did not say it plainly. Instead, he might bring a scroll with an old story that hinted at a wiser path. He might offer tea, and while pouring it, mention a proverb, a gentle nudge. A quiet suggestion, not a challenge. This is prompting through ritual. Imagine two samurai who disagree. They do not argue. They do not raise voices. Instead, they write letters, carefully worded, deliberately indirect. A letter might begin with seasonal greetings, move into a historical reference, then gently propose a change. It might take 5 paragraphs to say, "Please reconsider." But that is the beauty of it. The request is hidden inside the ritual. And because of that, it can be heard without shame. It gives the receiver space. It allows dignity. Even within families, this form of prompting was used. A wife might express her concern not with direct words, but by rearranging a household altar. A son might protest a duty by writing a haiku about withered branches. These were not games. These were serious conversations, carried out in the language of respect. The samurai knew that open conflict could destroy more than relationships. It could damage reputation, duty, structure. So instead, they used subtle tools. Bowing slightly longer. Folding a robe differently. Taking one step back instead of forward. Each gesture could speak. In modern terms, think of this as prompting with atmosphere. You are not just giving a command. You are creating a space where the command can be accepted. You are shaping the room, not just the message. Think of how this applies to your own requests, with people, with systems, even with yourself. Do you rush your questions? Or do you take time to shape them? Do you demand? Or do you invite? Let's take a modern example. You could say to someone, "Tell me what to do." But a samurai approach might be, "I've seen how calmly you handle this. If you were in my place, what step would you take first?" The result might be the same, advice. But the feeling is different. The invitation is different. The ritual of prompting changes how the answer arrives. This idea can also be used when prompting an AI or shaping your thoughts. Instead of barking instructions, build a frame. Instead of rushing into a result, set the stage with a quiet question. Here is an example of a poorly shaped prompt. Make me a cool story with fighting. Now here's one shaped with ritual. Write a calming story about a retired samurai who returns to his mountain home after years of war, where he must learn to live without violence. Do you feel the difference? Ritual gives form to your intention. Conflict, even quiet, inner conflict, becomes manageable when shaped through clear, respectful structure. The samurai were not afraid of conflict, but they knew that uncontrolled conflict wastes energy. They saw that control, repetition, and ritual could help transform conflict into understanding. Sometimes, two warriors could settle a matter without words at all. A shared tea, a single look, the placing of a sword on the floor, unfastened. These moments carried more meaning than any speech. They were prompts of the body, rituals that said, "I see you," or "I yield," or "I remain firm." And when words were used, they were often poetic. Not as decoration, but as a way of smoothing the sharp edge of disagreement. You can practice this. Try framing your own next question like a samurai would, with calm, care, and subtle purpose. Use structure. Use tone. Use ritual. You might begin with a moment of stillness. Then write the question. Then pause before sending it. In this way, prompting becomes more than a tool. It becomes a habit of mind. A practice. A path. And perhaps that's the hidden lesson of the samurai. Not to fight better, but to live more attentively. To prompt the world, and yourself, with calm intention. Now, we move forward again, back into the household, into the quieter corners. Into a life most often lived beside the warrior, not in front of him. In segment 16, we turn to the women of the samurai class. Often silent, often forgotten, but always there. Next is the role of the samurai wife. The sword rests on its rack. The sandals are clean and tucked by the door. Outside, a pine tree leans into the wind, its needles still. Inside the samurai house, where the walls are made of paper and the ceilings are low, another rhythm continues. One that is quieter, steadier, often unseen. Let us now spend time with the woman who lives behind the curtain. The samurai wife. Her world is filled with duties, but not the kind sung about in war stories. There are no medals for her work. No titles. And yet, without her, the house would not function. The family would not endure. The name would not survive. A samurai wife was not just a companion. She was the manager of the household, the silent strategist, the one who kept the scrolls in order and the children on the right path. She was both gentle and firm, always watching, always waiting, always ready. Her day began early, before the sun rose. The household had to be in motion, rice soaking, water boiling, floors swept. She directed the servants if there were any. If not, she did it herself. Her hands were rarely idle. When not working, she sewed. When not sewing, she wrote. When not writing, she prayed. She kept track of rice stores and household accounts. She prepared offerings for the ancestors. She tended to her children's education, not just letters and numbers, but manners, customs, expectations. If her son was to become a samurai, it began with her. She also kept her husband's armor clean and ready. Not polished like decoration, but maintained like a tool. Straps repaired. Linings replaced. Everything where it belonged. because when the call came, there was no time to fix a missing buckle. But beyond these physical tasks, she also carried the emotional weight of the household. Samurai men were trained to be distant, focused, quiet, hard. The wife was the one who created calm. She absorbed tension. She soothed frayed pride. She honored the silences, even when she longed to speak. Sometimes she received bad news first. A messenger arriving with a folded note, a servant whispering of death or dishonor. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She bowed. She breathed. She prepared to deliver the news gently, or carry the burden alone. And yet she was not weak. Some wives were trained in defense. Not to march into battle, but to defend the home if her husband was away. She might know how to use a naginata, a long pole with a curved blade, to protect her children. She might keep a short blade hidden in a drawer. Her strength was quiet, but real. In stories from the Edo period, we find examples of wives who wrote letters to lords, asking for protection, arranging marriages, settling disputes. Their writing was careful, respectful, but full of strategy. They knew how to navigate the social maze. When to wait, when to press, when to bow lower than necessary to win time or favor. Still, there were limits. The samurai wife had little freedom. Her marriage was arranged, often young. She could not inherit land. She rarely traveled. If she bore only daughters, her position in the household weakened. If her husband failed in duty or died in shame, she shared the stain, even if she had no part in the event. In the worst cases, she might be expected to take her own life. Jigai, a ritual suicide for women, was sometimes performed to preserve honor, usually with a small blade to the throat. But this was not common. More often, she lived on, quietly, steadily, surviving the shame, caring for children, maintaining what could still be saved. And yet, in small ways, she found power. She influenced which tutor came for the boys. She shaped the moral tone of the household. She chose the songs sung at night, the stories told by candlelight. She guided the servants, set the tone, determined the rhythm of life inside the paper walls. When a guest arrived, she oversaw the tea. She inspected the tray. She placed the cups. And in that moment, the household's reputation rested on her precision. When her husband returned from travel or war, it was her voice that welcomed him, her eyes that looked for changes, her hands that prepared the bath, the meal, the silence. And when he left again, it was her quiet strength that kept everything in place. We might think of her as passive, but that would be wrong. She was the axis, the still point, the one who remembered what mattered when others forgot. In modern terms, you might say she was the prompt behind the scene, the silent guide that kept the system running. Never flashy, rarely noticed, but essential. So let's take a lesson here. Sometimes the strongest prompt is not the loudest. Sometimes it is the most consistent, the most thoughtful, the one that keeps returning to duty, even when no one is watching. When you shape your prompts, to others, to yourself, to a system, consider the samurai wife. Consider clarity, balance, patience, and respect. As we close this segment, the walls of the house feel warmer now. The sword still waits by the door, but the strength of the home is not in steel. It is in the steady hands, the folded robes, the quiet care of someone whose name history often forgets. Next, we turn away from the house and into the city, into places of color, noise, and outcasts. Because not everyone fit into the neat rules of samurai life. The clean halls of the samurai household fade behind you now. The smell of incense and quiet duty is gone. You step through a side gate, past the outer wall, and into a different world. Louder, rougher, less controlled. The street. This is where rules bend. Where life does not always follow the scroll. Where people who do not belong to noble houses or polished lineages still carve out space to live, sell, sing, and survive. Welcome to the world of the street markets and the tattooed outcasts. In the bustling towns of feudal Japan, especially in the Edo period, every morning began with the same pattern. Wooden shutters slammed open. Children ran errands. The air filled with smoke from cooking fires and the smell of fish packed in straw. The samurai passed quickly through these places, heads high, swords at their sides. But most people stayed here, artisans, performers, cooks, beggars, and the bureaucramen, the outcast class. Many of these people were invisible in official records. They didn't own land. They didn't hold ranks. They couldn't become warriors or scholars. Yet they were everywhere, handling leather, butchering animals, cleaning toilets, making sandals, hauling firewood, doing the work samurai would never touch. Among them were the tattooed, criminals, runaways, or simply people too poor or too different to be accepted. Tattooing in old Japan was not fashion. It was punishment. Criminals were often marked on the arms, face, or forehead. Not with art, but with harsh black lines or symbols that could not be hidden. These were not the elegant dragons or koi fish you might see today. These were warnings to others. This person broke the law. But over time, those who were marked reclaimed the practice. Some began to add to the lines, to build patterns, to shape their own story in ink. The designs spread underground, waves, flames, tigers, peonies, bold and fierce. They covered the body like armor. The authorities hated this. They saw it as defiance. But for many, it was survival. In a world where they had no home, no name, no status, the tattoo became identity. A quiet declaration, I am still here. In the markets, these outcasts worked beside traveling merchants and street vendors. The noise was constant, sellers shouting, drums thudding, children laughing, cats weaving between feet. Stalls overflowed with rice cakes, pickled plums, rough cloth, roasted chestnuts, and cheap toys. Everything was touched by hand. Everything could be traded. You could buy old scrolls for 1 coin. You could have your fortune told with shells. You could watch a monkey perform tricks on a rope, or listen to a blind man play the shamisen, his fingers worn from years of plucking. These people had their own rhythms, their own honor. A butcher might give free scraps to temple beggars. A tattooed laborer might protect a child from being cheated. They lived by different codes, not written but remembered. In these neighborhoods, language shifted too. More slang, fewer titles, more laughter, more curses, more warmth. There was pride here, even in poverty. Pride in skill, in toughness, in helping your neighbors when no one else would. The samurai rarely entered these markets unless on official duty. When they did, the streets changed. Voices dropped. Eyes turned. But as soon as the warrior passed, the noise returned. Life pressed in again. And yet, despite the division, the outcast and the elite lived closer than they realized. The butcher prepared the meat that fed the palace. The tanner made the leather for the sword handle. The street singer composed ballads that wandered from mouth to mouth until they reached noble ears. Even the samurai needed the market, though they rarely admitted it. There is something powerful about this part of history, because it reminds us that the past was not just made by kings and warriors. It was made by everyone. The nameless, the loud, the marked, the ones who made space for each other when no one else would. You might think of them now as early prompt engineers of their own lives. They ask not with words, but with action, with presence, with resistance. If the samurai wife prompted through care and ritual, the market vendor prompted through noise and cleverness. The tattooed outcast prompted through visibility, turning shame into story. When we think of prompting today, we often imagine typing quietly in front of a screen. But prompting is more than that. It's asking a world that may not care to notice you to respond anyway. It's demanding a place at the table, even when the rules say no. So as we leave the market, the smell of roasted sweet potatoes still lingering, the laughter fading behind us, let's remember those who were not supposed to shape history, but did so anyway. Now, as the sun begins to lower, we approach stone. Walls, gates, shadows stretching long. Not the quiet of the countryside, but the cold grandeur of wealth and defense. We step into the stone heart of samurai authority. Castle walls and candle shadows. The road begins to rise. Stone paths replace dirt. The chatter of markets fades behind you, and the air becomes still, heavy with formality. You are approaching something larger than any single life. A symbol of order, of power, of fear. The castle. This is not a fairy tale castle with tall white towers and flowing banners. A Japanese samurai castle is something else. Built not to charm, but to control. Sharp angles, deep moats, narrow staircases, walls that twist like a maze. It does not invite. It intimidates. And yet, within those high walls, life continues. Not loudly, not freely, but precisely. You pass through the outer gate. It is huge, wooden, reinforced with iron. Guards bow low but watch you carefully. Beyond it, the path turns unexpectedly, making it harder for attackers to charge straight through. Every angle is designed with defense in mind. Samurai were trained to understand this space as both symbol and trap. The layout of a castle wasn't just about protection. It was about prompting behavior. It shaped how people moved, how they acted, how they waited. Inside the walls, everything is layered. The outermost parts house soldiers, workers, and stables. Further in are storehouses, kitchens, guard rooms. The air smells of straw, ash, and boiled barley. You hear the clang of armor being repaired. Somewhere a horse stomps. Climb higher, and the sound disappears. Now you are in the inner circle. Here live the high-ranking samurai and the lord's personal retainers. The gardens are trimmed, the gravel raked in perfect lines. Servants walk quietly in socks. No one speaks above a whisper. Finally, you reach the main keep, the Tenshu. Tall, stern, made of heavy wood and stone. From a distance, it looks like a place of command. Up close, it feels like a prison of ceremony. Inside, light is rare. Walls slide silently on wooden rails. Candles flicker, throwing soft shadows on paper screens. The rooms are spare, a tatami mat, a scroll, maybe a sword stand. Beauty here is not luxury. It is discipline. This is where the daimyo, the lord, sits. He does not wander. He waits, like the center of a wheel. Meetings here are slow, deliberate. A visitor enters, bows, kneels, speaks carefully. Every word matters. Every silence does too. The wrong phrase could end a career. Or worse, those candle shadows carry secrets. Political rivalries, family tensions, uneasy alliances. Behind the calm face of the castle lies constant calculation. You can see it in the faces of the retainers. They are dressed simply, but nothing is out of place. Their hair is smooth, their posture perfect. They answer questions with measured tones. They never interrupt. To survive here, a samurai had to master more than swordplay. He had to learn how to read a room, how to speak just enough, how to withdraw with honor. The castle taught patience. It taught precision. It taught that silence is sometimes stronger than a blade. Now imagine being summoned here. Your sandals echo on the polished wood. You kneel, hands placed flat before you. You wait, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. A message is delivered. A command. You bow. You leave. You do not argue. You do not sigh. You follow the path back down, through doors, past gates, back into the open air. Only then do you breathe. Castles were more than homes. They were machines. Machines powered by ritual, fear, and duty. And yet, inside them lived real people. Guards who fell asleep on cold nights. Cooks who forgot the salt. Children who tiptoed past sliding doors. And in the deepest part of night, the castle changed. The candles burned low. The footsteps faded. Only the wind remained, pressing against the paper walls. This was when secrets were passed. When thoughts wandered. When even the most powerful lord stared at the ceiling and wondered if his walls would hold another day. In your world, the castle might be a system, a rule set, a place of pressure. But remember, even castles have cracks. Even the strongest walls were built by hands. When prompting within power, use care. Use form. Use presence. But know also that every structure is human. Every shadow holds a breath. Now we step away from stone. We return to the edge, to the samurai who did not succeed. Who lost. Who broke. Because not every warrior ended in glory. We explore failure, not as punishment, but as part of the truth. Next is when a samurai failed. The castle gates have closed behind you now. The candle shadows are gone. The stone walls do not speak of what they've seen, but if they did, they would whisper of fear just as often as they whispered of glory. And now we must walk a more difficult path. One less honored, less remembered. The path of failure. Because not every samurai won. Not every campaign succeeded. Not every oath was kept. Not every blade stayed clean. Sometimes the story ended with shame, with exile, with silence, or worse, with the quiet ritual of seppuku. Failure, for a samurai, was not always a matter of personal fault. It could come from bad luck, from a lord's poor decisions, from a battle lost by someone else. But still, the weight fell on the samurai's shoulders, because the code Bushido was strict, and society was watching. Imagine a young samurai, sent to deliver a message to a rival clan. The journey is long. He faces rain, mud, bandits. He arrives late. The message is refused. War follows. Who is blamed? Sometimes it is the messenger. Or think of a battle. A lord orders his men to charge. They do. But the enemy was ready. The samurai fight bravely, but they lose. Their clan's banner falls. Afterward, the lord survives, but his men are gone. Their families are left to explain why their fathers did not return. In such cases, failure is quiet. There is no trial, no public defense. The samurai may be ordered to retire, or dismissed, or even told to end his life. The practice of seppuku, or ritual suicide, was one of the darkest expectations of the samurai class. It was done not in rage or despair, but in form, with preparation, with witnesses, with a final letter or poem. A short blade was drawn. The belly was cut, usually in 2 strokes. And then, if the man was of high status, a trusted companion stood behind him to finish the act swiftly. But not every failed samurai followed this path. Some fled. Some became ronin, masterless warriors, wandering without a lord. These men were seen as dangerous, suspicious. Their loyalty had no anchor. And yet, many of them lived on. They found work as guards, teachers, even mercenaries. Some wrote poetry. Some trained farmers in swordsmanship. Some joined religious orders. They had no house, no banner, but they had their skills. And sometimes they had regrets. The shame of failure could follow a samurai for years. Neighbors whispered. Marriage offers disappeared. Children were mocked. A man who once stood proud might now pass through alleys with his eyes lowered, wearing plain robes, carrying no weapon. And yet, from these ruins, some of the most powerful stories grew. One famous example is the tale of the 47 Ronin, a group of samurai whose lord was disgraced and forced to die. They became Ronin, scattered across the land. But they waited. For over a year they watched. They planned. And when the time was right, they avenged their lord, killing the man who had humiliated him. Afterward, they did not flee. They turned themselves in. And then together they committed seppuku. To some, this was the perfect example of honor. To others, it was proof that the system was too cruel. Either way, the story remains, a reminder that failure is not the end of the story. Sometimes it becomes the heart of it. You may wonder what this means for prompting, for your own life. Well, failure is a form of feedback, a signal. It teaches you how the system responds. It helps shape better questions. A failed prompt tells you not only what didn't work, it often hints at what might. The samurai who failed had 2 choices, collapse or reflect. Many chose the second. They adjusted. They retreated. They watched. And slowly they learned how to live again, not as perfect warriors, but as wiser men. In your own learning, this matters. Every mistake is a mark, not a tattoo of shame, but a lesson in ink. If you miss, look again. Refine your words. Adjust your form. Ask differently. A failed prompt is not a broken sword. It is a blade that needs sharpening. As we leave this segment, the night feels quieter now. There is a different kind of respect in the air, not for perfection, but for endurance. For those who did not shine, but survived. For those who fell and stood again, slower and softer, but still walking. Next, we shift back to the theme of precision, of balance. We look at how small movements and careful forms carried meaning in samurai life, and in ours. The night is deep now. The wind has calmed. The fire has burned down to glowing coals. You are in that quiet part of the evening where everything feels soft and slightly suspended, like time itself is taking a breath. This is the perfect moment to consider something easily overlooked in a world of loud voices and fast commands: stillness. For the samurai, stillness was not emptiness. It was presence, a full awareness of the body, the mind, the situation, a readiness held inside calm. And within this stillness was something very valuable: precision. Let us begin with the katana, the samurai sword. It was not used often. Contrary to popular images, a samurai might go weeks or months without ever drawing it. But it was always ready. And when drawn, every motion mattered. Cutting with a katana was not about force. It was about alignment. The wrist, the elbow, the shoulder, all moved in harmony. The strike had to be smooth, clean, deliberate. A single mistake in angle could make the sword catch or glance off. That is why hours, even years, were spent practicing one motion, over and over, in silence. Now consider how that applies to prompting. When you shape a prompt, whether for an AI, a person, or yourself, are you rushing? Are you vague? Or are you moving with the calm precision of someone who knows exactly what they want, and how best to ask for it? Precision doesn't mean length. It means clarity. For example, let's look at 2 prompts. Write something cool about samurai. Describe a calming morning in the life of a samurai child with sounds, smells, and quiet routines. Which one carries more presence? Which one shows awareness? The second is more precise. And more still. It doesn't shout. It invites. Samurai training included long hours of kata, forms repeated endlessly. Not for show, but for discipline. Each step, each breath, each bow was part of a larger rhythm. This was prompting in motion, asking the body to remember, asking the spirit to align. When facing an opponent, a skilled samurai did not strike first. He observed. He waited. He read the other's posture. And often, the fight was decided before a blade was drawn, by who understood the rhythm more clearly. In daily life, this same principle held true. If a samurai wished to make a request to his lord, he did not blurt it out. He waited for the right moment, chose the right words, considered who might be listening. He asked with care, not just for politeness, but because a well-placed question could shape outcomes more powerfully than force. This is still true today. When prompting, think of tone. Think of timing. Think of the subtle cues that affect how your request is received. A calm, clean prompt, one shaped with care, often produces better results than a rushed or messy one. Think also of the food, the writing brush. Calligraphy was not a decorative hobby. It was a way to train the mind. The stroke of a character had to be balanced. The brush had to flow, not jerk. If the hand trembled, the ink showed it. If the mind wandered, the shape suffered. But with focus, each kanji became a form of beauty. A message in motion. When you write, even if it is a command to a machine, you are doing the same thing. Leaving marks. Tracing thoughts. Inviting a reply. You can practice this now. Choose a sentence you often say. Then pause. Breathe. Rewrite it with stillness in mind. Simplify. Clarify. Then read it again. How does it feel? The samurai knew that every unnecessary motion wasted energy. Every extra word, every rushed swing, every clumsy gesture made the whole weaker. In a world where balance meant survival, there was no room for noise. Stillness is not passive. It is potent. When you prompt from stillness, you are not retreating. You are listening more deeply, observing more closely. You are allowing meaning to rise from the quiet, rather than drowning it in movement. This can be hard in modern life. We are trained to react, to respond quickly, to produce. But the samurai remind us that waiting is not failure. It is often the first step toward mastery. So as this segment ends, let yourself sit with the silence. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts settle like ink in water. The sword is still. The brush is clean. The next motion is yours to choose. Now we step back into the heart of samurai culture, where duty and death were intertwined. A place where family expectations shaped not just lives, but legacies. The room is quiet again. The candle has been trimmed, its light steady and soft. You are sitting now in a space that is neither the battlefield nor the market, neither the castle nor the alley. This space belongs to the home, to the name, to the weight of generations. This is where family duty begins, and where sometimes it ends. In the world of the samurai, a name was more than something you wrote with a brush. It was a responsibility, a thread stretching back through ancestors, each one watching, each one listening. To live as a samurai was to carry that thread with you every day, to keep it untangled, unbroken. Children were taught this early. Before they could hold a sword, they were taught how to bow, how to greet elders, how to light incense for ancestors at the family shrine. These small acts were not just about manners. They were rehearsals for a life of obligation. Everything you did reflected on your family, your posture, your tone, your loyalty, your mistakes. If you failed, it was not only your own burden. It marked your brothers, your parents, even your children. This pressure shaped every decision. If a father was called to serve, he did not ask if he wanted to go. He prepared. If a son dishonored himself, the shame could bring down the whole house. If a husband died in battle, the widow was expected to continue with grace, never showing bitterness. There were ceremonies for all of it: birth, manhood, marriage, retirement, death. Each one carried a set of rules, of words, of silences. Even grief had its boundaries. And behind it all was the final ritual. The one that samurai trained for, but hoped never to face: seppuku. We have touched on this before. But now let us pause with it. Gently. Seppuku was not about violence. It was about control. About restoring honor when something had gone wrong. A failed mission, a broken oath, a lord's disgrace. A man would prepare himself carefully. Bathe. Dress in white. Write a final message, often a short poem. Then, in front of witnesses, he would kneel, take the blade, and begin. The act was painful, yes. But more than that, it was precise. The way he knelt, the way he breathed, the way he folded his robe to avoid staining it with blood. Every gesture was a kind of language, a final message to the world. I may have failed, but I remain true. And always behind him stood a trusted companion, the kaishakunin. His role was to deliver the final stroke, a clean, merciful cut. This was not an execution. It was a gift, a sign of respect. This act was never taken lightly. It was not done in a rush. It was not hidden. It was a form of closure, a return of responsibility to the family, a resetting of the name. Women, too, were expected to show this level of duty, though in different ways. A samurai wife might never hold a sword, but she held the family together when her husband was gone. She taught her children the stories of their ancestors. She guarded the household spirit. And if all else failed, she too had rituals to follow, quieter, less remembered, but no less real. You might wonder, how can something so strict bring peace? But for the samurai, duty gave shape to chaos. In a world of changing lords, sudden wars, and uncertain futures, duty was the thing you could hold. It was the thread, the line, the way forward. Even in death, there was form. A samurai's grave was simple, a stone marker, perhaps with a poem. No praise, no display, just a name, a date, and silence. The family would visit, bow, offer tea, whisper prayers, then leave. And yet, these quiet rituals still speak. They tell us that meaning does not come from length of life, or wealth, or fame. It comes from how one carries the weight of expectation, how one responds when the path grows hard, how one chooses stillness over panic, honor over escape. In the world of prompting, this lesson still applies. When you craft a prompt, you are making a commitment. A small one, perhaps a request, a direction, an idea. But even that carries your name, your style, your intention. A well-formed prompt reflects care, awareness, duty to the process. Imagine you are preparing a final message, not because it is the end, but because it matters. Would you rush it? Would you leave it messy? Or would you pause, breathe, and write it with precision? That is the art of prompt craft. Like the samurai's death poem, it may be short, but it can still carry everything. As this segment ends, the candle burns low. The room is quiet. You sit with the ancestors now, not watching, not judging, just listening. And next, we look at the softer tools of legacy. Not swords, not scrolls, but brushes. The paper lies flat. The brush waits beside the inkwell. Your hand hovers, but you do not yet write. Because in the world of the samurai, writing was not just expression. It was discipline, stillness, control. It was a kind of battle in itself, but one where the opponent was the self. Let us now turn to the practice of brush calligraphy. To an outsider, it might look like art. Beautiful kanji, black ink flowing over rice paper, elegant strokes arranged with care. But for a samurai, it was something deeper. Calligraphy was a form of self-mastery, a test of the mind and body. A single character could contain years of training. The brush, known as food, was soft and flexible. It bent with pressure. To control it, your grip had to be firm but relaxed. Too stiff, and the lines became unnatural. Too loose, and the ink bled. The key was balance, a gentle, steady rhythm between the hand, the breath, and the intention behind the stroke. Samurai children began practicing calligraphy as early as they could hold a brush. Before they learned to fight, they learned to form characters, starting with simple ones like mountain, river, or wind. Over time, their practice expanded to poems, letters, and famous sayings. Each kanji had its own spirit. A good stroke showed more than shape. It showed confidence, clarity, precision. The ink reflected your state of mind. It was said that a shaky soul produced a shaky line. And this was no idle task. A samurai was expected to write letters, petitions, reports, often by hand. And those documents would be read by lords, judges, scholars. A careless character could ruin meaning, or worse, cause offense. This is why calligraphy was respected like swordsmanship. In fact, some called it the sword of the mind. It sharpened focus. It slowed time. It taught you how to act with care, not rush, not hesitate. But not all stories about calligraphy are gentle. In some schools, calligraphy was used as punishment. If a student misbehaved or showed laziness, he might be told to copy a phrase 100 times, or write a difficult kanji until his wrist cramped. In harsher cases, students trained until their fingers blistered or bled. Some wrapped their hands in cloth and kept going anyway. These were the broken fingers behind the brush. And yet, even through pain, the lessons continued. Because samurai life was not about comfort. It was about perseverance. Even when your hand shook. Even when the ink ran dry. Even when the paper tore beneath your stroke. There is a lesson here, too, about failure. Not every line was perfect, not every character elegant, but with each repetition, the student improved. He learned to breathe more evenly, to hold the brush lighter, to let go of tension. In time, a student might come to enjoy the silence of the practice, the way the room faded, the way the sound of ink against paper became like a slow drumbeat. Some described it as a form of meditation, others as a way to hear their own thoughts more clearly. And in the final days of a samurai's life, when everything else was stripped away, it was often calligraphy that remained. Before committing seppuku, many samurai composed a short death poem. This was not written in haste. It was crafted carefully, each line balanced like the steps of a duel. The poem was then written with brush and ink. One final message, one final gesture of control. In your own work, especially in prompting, think of the brush. Are you pressing too hard, forcing meaning where it doesn't fit? Or are you letting the ink flow, shaping your thoughts with calm? When you write a prompt, even a simple one, imagine the paper before you. Imagine the brush in your hand. Shape the words with care, not just for output, but for clarity of thought. And when the response is wrong, when the ink spreads or the character warps, do not tear the page. Begin again. Each mistake is a lesson. Each rewrite is a step toward mastery. Brush calligraphy teaches patience, precision, and the value of trying again. Now, as we close this segment, let the ink dry in your mind. Let the page lie still. Let your fingers rest, not because the work is over, but because you are learning to wait between strokes. In the next segment, we explore another quiet but powerful sensory experience: the textures and smells of clothing, and what they told others about who you were. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a humid summer morning in a samurai town. The air is thick. The sky hangs low. Cicadas scream from the trees in their steady, buzzing rhythm. And everywhere there is the scent of fabric, warm, worn, and damp with moisture. This is not the sharp smell of new clothing, nor the dusty scent of winter robes. This is something softer, older, the smell of wet silk. Samurai clothing was not just functional. It was symbolic. It told the world who you were, what your rank was, and how carefully you lived. Even the simplest robe, a plain cotton yukata, carried meaning. But in summer, when the heat pressed in from all sides, clothing became both a burden and a statement. Let us begin with the feel of the fabric. Silk, prized in samurai society, was smooth and light, almost slippery to the touch. It didn't soak up sweat like cotton. Instead, it clung gently to the skin, holding the heat just enough to remind you that you were still proper, still dressed for your role. In the morning, a young samurai might rise before dawn. He would dress slowly, layer by layer. First, the underrobe, usually cotton, simple, clean. Then, over it, the formal layers, a light kimono, tied with a sash. If he was of high rank, perhaps a matsuki, a dark robe marked with the family crest in white ink. Silk was preferred for these outer layers, not to boast, but to show respect. But silk was difficult to manage in the summer. It absorbed moisture from the air and clung to the body. It smelled faintly of the dye used to color it, often indigo or charcoal gray. When wet, it released a scent like steamed rice and old paper. Not unpleasant, but not fresh either. Just lived in. And it wasn't just silk that filled the summer air with texture. As the day warmed, the scent of straw sandals, zori, mixing with sweat would rise from the streets. Dust would settle into sleeves. And every move, every bow, every step made the fabric shift and rustle. In a quiet room, you could hear a samurai's robe whisper against the tatami floor. The way one wore their clothing mattered too. Loose robes suggested laziness. A sash tied too high or too low was seen as careless. And the wrong pattern, especially something too bright or floral, could bring quiet judgment. Even among children, appearance was taught as a form of discipline. But clothing could also serve as armor in the social sense. A worn but carefully folded robe said, "I may be poor, but I still respect the code." A spotless crest on a faded kimono said, "My family name still holds weight." The small things spoke louder than words. There was also a kind of quiet rebellion in clothing. Some lower-ranking samurai, feeling the sting of limited means, would dye their robes at home, creating deep indigo or reddish hues that stood out in the right light. Others might fold their sleeves in unusual ways, or wear their sash just slightly off the norm. Not enough to be disrespectful, but enough to hint at personality beneath the formality. And in the rain, when the skies opened and summer storms rolled across the tiled roofs, everything changed. Silk robes darkened with water. They stuck to the body like a second skin. The smell of wet fabric filled the air, especially in temples or long hallways where the wind could not carry it away. People sat still, hands folded, waiting for the storm to pass, breathing in the closeness of damp silk and wood smoke. In that waiting, clothing became more than just appearance. It became part of memory, the feeling of your sleeve sticking to your arm, the sound of sandals slipping on a wet path, the scent of someone passing by, their robe trailing just enough warmth to remind you they were real. Even now, centuries later, you can feel it if you pause. Smell is powerful. It brings back images faster than sight. It links you to places you never stood. In prompting, sensory memory is your secret tool. If you want to recreate a historical scene, begin with the senses, what they touched, what they smelled, what they wore. Begin with the wet silk. Your prompts don't need to be dramatic to be strong. Sometimes, a single smell can hold a whole story. Think of this. Describe a summer morning in Edo from the point of view of a boy wearing a silk robe still damp from washing. That prompt holds more potential than a dozen facts. Because it starts with experience, with presence, with something real. So as this segment ends, breathe in the heat of that long-ago summer. Feel the weight of the robe across your shoulders. Let the silk cool against your skin. Let it remind you that even quiet details matter. In history, in prompting, and in how we remember the past. Now we return to the sword. But this time, not in use, just for show. We explore the times when the weapon was more symbol than threat. The sword. For the samurai, it was more than a weapon. It was a soul, a symbol of honor, of identity. But not every day was a battle. Not every hour required blood or courage. In fact, for many samurai, the sword they carried was more often a quiet companion than a tool of violence. In this segment, we explore the many times when the blade was worn, but never drawn. Picture a city street in the Edo period. The year is somewhere between 1600 and 1800. Peace has ruled Japan for generations under the Tokugawa shogunate. The great wars are over. The clans have settled. And most samurai now serve as administrators, guards, or scholars. Still, each morning they put on the sword. Two, in fact. A long sword, the katana, and a shorter one, the wakizashi. Together, they formed the daisho, the symbol of a samurai's status. These blades were worn tucked into the sash, the hilts carefully angled for balance. Even the way a man walked was shaped by them, straight, slow, deliberate, so the scabbards would not bump or rattle. But in this long age of peace, many of those swords were never used. In offices, they were placed beside writing desks. In courtrooms, they remained untouched at a samurai's side while he read reports or gave testimony. In meetings, they served more as reminders than threats. A kind of quiet punctuation. I am of the warrior class. I am trained, even if I never need to show it. Over time, some swords became ceremonial. Lighter, less practical for combat, but finely decorated. Lacquered sheaths, golden inlays, engravings on the blade. These were not tools for war. They were family treasures, gifts passed from father to son, symbols of continuity. And still, they were worn daily. To leave the house without a sword was to risk shame or suspicion. Even in peacetime, a samurai was expected to be prepared. But that preparation became a habit more than a need. In this way, the sword became performance. A samurai might attend a poetry contest or a tea ceremony with his blade on his hip, never touching it. He might walk through a market where the fishmongers and carpenters worked with their hands, while his remained still on the hilt of an unused sword. Sometimes younger samurai struggled with this. Trained in martial arts, eager for purpose, they longed to use their skills. But most days offered no cause. And so they walked, waited, memorized codes of conduct, practiced their cuts in private, and hoped silently that honor would not demand a real test. There were even times when the sword was a burden. During long meetings or travel, it dug into the ribs. In the summer heat, the scabbard grew slippery with sweat. And always there was the social pressure to carry it with grace. Never let it clatter. Never show discomfort. Never reveal that the weapon, once feared, was now more decoration than danger. This tension between form and function teaches us something important. Sometimes the appearance of readiness is its own message. The sword did not have to be used to carry weight. It simply had to be worn correctly. It became a kind of silent prompt, a statement not made with words, but with posture. In your own work, especially in prompting, this idea still holds power. You may not need to use every tool you have, but knowing they are there, and signaling that awareness, can change how your message is received. A prompt does not always need to be loud or complex. Sometimes its strength lies in restraint, in suggesting a depth that goes unspoken. Imagine a line like this. Write a peaceful scene from the point of view of a warrior who has not fought in years, but still sharpens his blade every morning. There is tension there, but also calm. It is a prompt that asks gently and waits for the meaning to unfold. So too did the samurai walk through towns and gardens with their swords at their sides. Not to threaten, not to boast, but to carry history with them, to remind themselves who they were, even when no one was watching. As this segment ends, picture the blade, polished, quiet, reflecting the lantern light. It does not need to move to be seen. It simply rests. A symbol, a story, a promise. Next, we move from silence to emotion, from calm to status, from restraint to shame. The samurai world was built on structure. Everyone had a place, a rank, a role to perform. This order kept the peace, but it also created pressure. Pressure to rise or to fall. Pressure to be seen the right way, to act properly, to carry the right weight of honor, never too much, never too little. And under all of it, quietly shaping every moment, was the force of status and the shadow of shame. Status wasn't only about what you owned or what you wore. It was how others saw you, how they bowed when you passed, how they spoke your name. A higher-ranking samurai might receive gifts, deference, careful silence. A lower one might be ignored or watched with suspicion. This was a world where small things said a lot. The thickness of your sash, the way you tied your sandals, the style of your topknot. Even the length of your sword was regulated by your position. Carrying a blade that was too long for your rank could lead to punishment, or worse, social humiliation. To be publicly shamed in this world was devastating. A missed greeting, a poorly chosen word, a robe worn improperly at a ceremony. These could lead to whispers, exclusion, or direct rebuke. And shame was sticky. It clung. If your father had dishonored himself, the mark followed you. If your cousin was dismissed from service, your entire family felt the weight. This created a culture of caution. Samurai learned to read every room, every glance, every pause in conversation. If your superior paused too long before answering you, it might mean you had overstepped. If a peer lowered their eyes, it might mean they had heard something about you. And so, behavior became a kind of constant prompting. Every action, how you walked, how you bowed, how you asked a favor, was a quiet request to the world. See me as I should be seen. That is what status was. A continuous conversation. And when it broke down, shame filled the silence. But shame, too, had rules. You could express it only in certain ways. A bowed head, a written apology, a temporary withdrawal from public life. Some samurai chose exile. Some entered a monastery. Others, in extreme cases, committed seppuku to restore their family's name. Women felt this pressure as well. A samurai wife might face shame if her household was disordered, if her children were rude, if her husband's service ended poorly. Yet, she had few tools to change her status. Her actions, her words, even her silence were all part of a delicate social script. But sometimes status shifted quietly. A minor samurai might gain favor by writing a good poem, or by giving clever advice at the right time. A young man might rise in the household by showing loyalty, not loud but steady. These moments of social mobility were rare, but they mattered, because everyone was watching, waiting, remembering. This kind of status pressure still exists, even now. In modern life, you might feel it when crafting your words, your emails, your messages. You might shape your tone based on who is reading. You might adjust your style based on how others might react. This is prompting for status. And when it doesn't land well, the feeling that follows is familiar: embarrassment, awkwardness, or shame. But here is the lesson the samurai world can teach us. These forces are not always bad. When understood gently, status can guide. It can help you see the landscape. When prompting, it reminds you to consider the reader, the system, the rules. And shame, when held softly, can show you where something slipped and how to adjust with care. Imagine a prompt like this. Write a letter from a middle-ranking samurai to his lord, apologizing for a minor failure, using respectful but indirect language. This prompt teaches more than history. It teaches how to speak carefully, how to hold both truth and politeness in balance. It's not only about what happened, but how it is shown. That is where prompting for status becomes a craft. Your own prompts can do the same. If you feel you've made a mistake, revise it with clarity, not panic. If you want to make a strong impression, choose your form with intention. Think of each word as a bow, each sentence as a posture. And when things don't go well, reflect quietly. Not to punish yourself, but to grow. As this segment ends, let the silence settle. Imagine yourself walking a narrow path, lined with stones. Your posture upright, your steps steady. The world watching, not with cruelty, but with quiet curiosity. In the next segment, we meet those who stepped outside the system. The masterless, the wanderers, the ones who had no status and no home, but carried the samurai spirit in a different form. The roads stretch wide and empty. The sky shifts from gray to gold as the morning mist lifts. And there, walking alone with no banner above his head, no home behind him, no lord to serve, is the Ronin. A samurai without a master. To many, the word Ronin meant shame. A failure. A man who had lost his place in the tightly woven fabric of samurai society. But to others, it also meant freedom. Possibility. A life outside the walls of duty and ritual. This segment is about those who walked that road. The wanderers. In theory, a samurai's loyalty was for life. If his lord died or was disgraced or dismissed him, he was supposed to follow him, sometimes even in death. But reality was more complicated. Sometimes a lord fell from power, and the samurai was left without purpose. Other times, a young warrior was too proud, too wild, or too poor to secure a stable position. And some were cast out, after a failure, a scandal, or simply a change in politics. These masterless men became Ronin. Some wandered the countryside, offering their skills as bodyguards, duelists, or sword instructors. Others settled in cities, living on the edge of respectability, always watched, never quite trusted. A Ronin wore the same blades as a loyal samurai, but his posture was different. His robes were often worn, his sandals dusty, his eyes alert but tired. In a world built on obedience, he was an anomaly, someone who had lived outside the order and survived. This made many people uneasy. In towns, Ronin were known to cause trouble. Some became drunkards. Others stirred up arguments. A few turned to crime. Without a lord's salary or support, life was hard. Many struggled to find work. Some ended up in gambling houses, sleeping in alleys, their swords wrapped in cloth to hide the shame. But not all stories were so bleak. Some Ronin found new purpose. They became teachers of the sword, running small dojos. They took work guarding merchants, escorting travelers, or writing for small officials. A few even became poets and philosophers, living simply, using their solitude to think and write. There is a kind of quiet dignity in these stories. Men who lost everything but carried on, who continued to bow properly, even when no one watched, who sharpened their swords, not for war, but for memory, for pride. The most famous tale of Ronin, of course, is that of the 47 loyal retainers. When their lord was forced to commit seppuku, they became masterless. But instead of wandering aimlessly, they waited, disguised themselves, worked menial jobs. For more than a year, they planned. And then, in a single night, they struck, killing the man responsible for their lord's downfall. Afterward, they turned themselves in and took their own lives. This act, both vengeance and loyalty, gave the word Ronin a new shade of meaning. Not just exile, not just failure, but also devotion, patience, strategy, and sacrifice. In modern terms, a Ronin might be seen as a freelancer, a student between schools, a person between roles, someone who once had structure and now must create it for themselves. Prompting, in a way, can help with this. If you feel lost in work, in learning, in your own thinking, you can begin to rebuild through careful questioning. Prompts are like maps. They don't provide the road, but they help you see where to step. Try something like, describe the inner thoughts of a former samurai living alone in a forest, haunted by duty, unsure of what honor means without a lord. Or, write a guidebook entry for how a Ronin survives in the city, how he earns, how he sleeps, how he watches the world. These prompts don't just teach you about the past. They help you think like someone adapting. They show you how loss can become movement, how exile can become insight. The Ronin remind us that even when systems fail, the self can remain. That solitude, though painful, can also be powerful. That a name without a banner is still a name. As we end this segment, imagine the road again. The soft crunch of sandals on gravel, the creak of a travel pack, the distant call of a bird overhead, and one man walking alone, not broken but unfinished. Next, we return to night, to law, to the quiet work of those who stayed behind, guarding a society that was always at risk of unraveling. The sun has long set. The streets are nearly silent. Paper lanterns sway from doorways, their glow soft and flickering. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then falls quiet. It is night in Edo, and you are walking slowly. Not as a traveler, not as a thief, but as a member of the Yuriki or Daishin patrol. Your job: to watch the streets that most people avoid after dark. In feudal Japan, especially during the long peace of the Tokugawa era, night patrols were essential. Cities like Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka grew busy during the day. Markets, processions, ceremonies, deliveries. But at night, those same streets became dangerous. Not just from criminals, though they existed, but from fire, rumor, sickness, and disorder. So the authorities organized a system. The Yuriki were the mid-ranking samurai who supervised. Beneath them were the Daishin, lower-ranking samurai or trusted men who did the walking. They carried wooden staffs, short swords, and a kind of badge. Their feet knew every alley, every corner where trouble might hide. But what did a night patrol actually look like? Picture this. 2 or 3 men, walking slowly down a narrow street. Their sandals are soft on the packed dirt. They carry a paper lantern on a pole, its frame rattling gently in the breeze. Their eyes scan every doorway, every rooftop, every pile of cloth that might be someone hiding. They are not allowed to speak loudly. No shouting. No laughing. If they suspect something, they stop. Listen. Knock on a door with a measured rhythm. Sometimes, the door opens to reveal a sleepy innkeeper. Other times, it stays closed. Much of their work is quiet observation. Some nights are calm. They walk their route. Stop at checkpoints. Nod to a night watchman sitting in his booth with a candle and a bell. Leave marks on wooden tally boards to show they were there. Other nights, trouble stirs. A merchant's storehouse smells of smoke. A drunk samurai wanders where he should not. A back gate is open that should be closed. In these cases, the patrol acts. Gently if possible. Firmly if needed. Always with the awareness that eyes are watching, and every decision could ripple through the ranks. There were areas of town considered off limits at night. These might be districts for entertainers, places where gambling or unsanctioned trade took place, or neighborhoods associated with outcasts. Patrols avoided these unless ordered. To enter was to risk social and physical danger. Yet sometimes they had to, when a fire broke out, when someone went missing, when a whispered tip led them to a hidden meeting. These moments were tense. The patrolmen moved carefully. No sudden movements. Politeness mixed with suspicion. A wrong step could bring shame. A hesitation could bring harm. There was no reward for bravery in this work. Only the knowledge that order had been kept. That nothing terrible had happened on your watch. And still, the patrol returned each night. This kind of duty teaches something important about presence. The idea that safety, order, and stability are not built by grand gestures, but by steady attention. The same quiet checking. The same route again and again. Watching for what changes. Listening for what doesn't fit. Prompting can work this way too. Not every prompt needs to be creative or strange. Some are about structure. Repetition. Making sure everything is in place before you move on. Think of this prompt. Describe a single night of a city patrol, focusing on silence, movement, and things left unsaid. It's a quiet idea, but inside it there is mood, pattern, responsibility. Just like in history, some patrols found nothing for weeks, but the emptiness was still valuable. It proved that peace held, that people slept safely in their beds, that the city for another night remained whole. Even today, night watchmen exist. Security guards, caretakers, nurses in quiet wards. People whose job is not to be seen, but to make sure others can rest. There's something comforting in that, the knowledge that even when you are asleep, someone is walking the edge of the dark for you. So, as this segment ends, let yourself imagine that slow walk. Lantern light casting moving shadows. Feet brushing dust. Doors closed. Windows dark. The patrol passing without a word, like the rhythm of breathing in a city at rest. Next, we turn to fire. Not symbolic fire. Real, consuming, devouring fire. And what happened when war and flames came to the capital itself? The silence of the night patrol is gone. In its place comes the roar of fire, the clash of weapons, the screams of horses, and the panicked footfalls of people trying to flee. Smoke curls through the sky like a dragon. The air is hot and bitter. Buildings fall not with thunder, but with the dry crackling of wood surrendering to flame. This is Kyoto, once the heart of Japan. A city of palaces, shrines, poems, and power. But now, in this moment of history, it is a city on fire. Kyoto has burned many times. But one of the most painful moments came during the long conflict known as the Unin War, which began in 1467. A struggle not just for control of the shogunate, but for the soul of the nation. What started as a fight between noble houses spiraled into chaos. And the capital suffered first. Imagine a noble district, wide-tiled streets, high walls, paper-sliding doors. Now imagine soldiers breaking down those doors. Fire being set not for heat, but for message. Entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. Temples looted. Books scattered. People fleeing with what little they could carry. Some samurai stayed and fought. Others deserted. Still others wandered the ruins, searching for lost family or for something to eat. There were no victors here. Only loss. Kyoto, once the jewel of Japan, was left in shambles. So many parts of the city burned that later maps simply marked wide areas as wasteland. Ash drifted through the air for weeks. Riverbeds filled with debris. The sound of bells, once used to mark prayer or time, now rang out to warn of new fires or raids. The war itself would go on for 10 years. 10 years of shifting alliances. Of samurai choosing between loyalty and survival. 10 years of ordinary people trying to live in a city that had no center left. And even when the war ended, the damage stayed. Kyoto never fully returned to the power it once had. The imperial court remained, but its influence faded. Trade moved elsewhere. New centers of authority rose. But amid the ashes, people rebuilt. Carpenters returned. Monks copied out what texts they could save. Children played among ruins. And slowly, new districts appeared. Narrower. Plainer. But alive. The memory of fire, though, remained in everything. It remained in the fire-watching towers built in cities afterward. In the stricter rules about roofing, cooking, and night patrols. It remained in stories told by old men in back alleys, about the night their home disappeared in smoke. In poems written on walls, short lines etched into charred beams. The plum tree returns. Though the house is only dust, the scent still lingers. In samurai culture, fire was feared but respected. It destroyed, yes, but it also cleansed. In a way, it forced people to ask, what survives when everything is taken? The answer for many was spirit, memory, duty, and the ability to begin again. The world changes slowly at first, then all at once. You are standing on a quiet road. The same road samurai once marched down, banners fluttering, blades at their hips. But now something is different. You hear the clatter of wooden wheels. The soft hiss of steam in the distance. A group of men pass by in European coats. A poster in the distance bears unfamiliar writing. The year is no longer the 1600s. It is the mid to late 1800s. The samurai age is coming to an end. This is the story of the Meiji Restoration, and the quiet, sometimes painful, fall of the samurai. For more than 250 years, the Tokugawa shogunate ruled Japan with a steady hand. The samurai class formed the backbone of society. Warriors, scholars, administrators, poets, priests, their roles were broad, but their identity was fixed. Then came the ships. In 1853, American warships under Commodore Perry arrived in Japanese waters. With black smoke, cannons, and polished boots, they demanded Japan open its ports. It was a shock, a jolt, a moment that made many realize how far the world had moved while Japan remained sealed. What followed was rapid change. Treaties, trade, turmoil. The shogunate, weakened and unsure, struggled to respond. Younger leaders in places like Satsuma and Choshu called for a return of power to the emperor. But this was not a return to old ways. It was a leap forward. They wanted factories, railroads, foreign education, a modern army, and in 1868 they succeeded. The shogun stepped down. The emperor, once more a symbol than a ruler, was restored to power. The Meiji era began. But for the samurai, this was not victory. It was farewell. The new government, in trying to modernize, began dismantling the old samurai privileges. Their stipends, guaranteed incomes, were reduced, then eliminated. Their right to carry swords in public was revoked. Their top knots were discouraged, then banned. In one generation, their entire world unraveled. Some samurai adapted. They became teachers, officers, politicians. Others opened businesses, wrote newspapers, studied abroad. But many, especially the poorer ones, struggled. They were trained in loyalty, not commerce. In warfare, not negotiation. Some resisted. In 1877, a rebellion broke out, led by Seigo Takamori, a respected samurai who had once helped bring about the Meiji government. Now disillusioned, he led thousands of former warriors in a final stand against the new regime. They wore old armor, carried swords, charged against rifles and artillery. They lost. It was the last true samurai war. After that, the class was dissolved. Officially, legally, gone, but not forgotten. Even today, the samurai spirit lives on, not in the sword, but in the ideas they carried. Discipline, service, honor, the sense of personal duty, even in times of great change. These are not things you can ban with a law. They remain. The fall of the samurai also teaches us something deep about how to handle change. Sometimes the world shifts, and we must let go of the old tools. But that does not mean abandoning who we are. The sword may be set aside, but the focus, the training, the thoughtfulness, those can move forward. Let us sit now, not in a battlefield or a tea house, but in a quiet room. The floor beneath us is smooth wood. Outside, the wind brushes through pine trees. A candle flickers on the low table. It is evening, and the age of the samurai is over. This final segment is not about a person or event. It is about endings, how they feel, how they change us, and how we carry them forward. The fall of the samurai was not just a political shift. It was an emotional and cultural turning. An era closed, and another began. But not all the old ways vanished. Some simply changed shape. Imagine someone born in 1850. As a child, they bowed to their father, a proud samurai in layered robes with a sharp sword at his side. They learned to recite poetry, to sit still, to walk with care. They practiced sword forms in the morning mist, and studied the codes of loyalty and obedience. By the time they were an adult, those same swords hung on walls instead of hips. Trains roared through cities. Schools taught Western science. Soldiers wore uniforms, not kimono. And yet, inside, the rhythm of their early life remained. How do you live in a world that no longer reflects the one you were raised in? That is the question many former samurai had to ask. Some answered by adapting. They embraced education. They took new jobs. They worked to improve their country, believing that their service could take new forms. Others withdrew. Quietly, respectfully. They did not protest loudly, but they did not fully accept the changes either. They carried their memories like folded paper in their sleeves. Always near, always silent. But even among those who struggled, there was grace. The samurai way, at its best, was not about power. It was about steadiness, about continuing on even when conditions changed. It was about knowing your values and living them in small, daily choices. And that's what many did. They continued to rise early, to teach their children how to kneel properly, how to listen carefully, how to respond with calmness and humility. They honored ancestors, maintained shrines, shared stories, wrote poems in simple brushstrokes. In these quiet acts, the samurai spirit endured. It reminds us that endings are not failures. They are transitions. One form gives way to another. The surface may shift, but the core can remain.